A huge red eye was watching the action unfolding right in front of it. The creature's paw was so huge and heavy that the ancient rock crumbled beneath it. The monster was of incredible size, and even more impressive were its huge fangs, which it showed to its opponents. The three boys looked at the monster with apprehension, as their strength was already at its limit, which could not be said about their enemy. Wrapping his huge clawed limbs around himself, the demon broke his silence and addressed the heroes. The creature asked where ordinary mortals got the audacity to challenge him. The main character, Jared Ross, jumped back to avoid putting his life in danger. However, the next moment the young man gathered his last strength into a fist and went on the attack. Moving around the monster at the speed of the wind, the young man dealt fatal blows with his sword. When the guy stopped his series of attacks, a column of dust effectively remained behind him. The defeated opponent smoothly disappeared, which meant another victory of people over monsters. Approaching the place where the demon had recently been, Jared crouched down, placed his sword on the ground, and extended his hand for the reward. When the item was in hand, the game reported that the hero received a fragment of the dragon's blood scroll. The young man brought the sheet closer to his face to carefully examine his winnings. The system offered to combine the 9 received fragments of the scroll, and the guy immediately agreed. At that very moment, a wave of light orange energy rose around him, indicating the beginning of some kind of process. Just as things calmed down, the game congratulated Jared on receiving the 5-star legendary Dragon's Blood Scroll. The player looked with admiration at the object that lay pleasantly heavy in his hand. But suddenly someone silently crept up from behind and thrust a sword into the guy's chest, and the much-desired scroll flew to the ground. Lester, who Jared considered his best friend, leaned into his ear and promised to take care of the scroll and Stephanie. When the young man moved away from the main character, a grin reigned on his face, which showed that everything was planned. The system reported that player Jared Ross was attacked by Lester Thomas's critical strike skill and lost all health. Next came a notification that the game did not detect the possibility of resurrection. Therefore, this means death. Apocalypse is a virtual reality game created by thousands of the best designers. Apocalypse is an action game set in the 21st century where monsters invaded the Earth through wormholes and attacked. The battle between the two sides caused serious damage to the economy and the environment of the Earth, and all living things on it began to mutate. All players who do not log into the game will be forcibly killed by the Apocalypse system and will become NPCs in the game world. However, after the launch of the open beta version of the game, all players who entered it faced a problem. They could not leave it. Our hero, like other people, fell into this trap, and no matter how much he pressed the exit button, nothing worked. Those who found themselves outside the virtual reality began to dissolve into thin air. Jared was inside the gaming space for 8 whole years, bravely overcoming all obstacles. It all ended with him being betrayed so easily by his best friend and lover. And it was very difficult to accept all of this. Opening his eyes and jumping up on the bed, the young man was still in the moment of his murder. The radio announced that the gates of the Apocalypse world would open in 2 hours and 12 minutes. Picking up the calendar, Jared was surprised by the date August 25th, 2025. Opening the window, the young man thought that this was impossible, since at that time the apocalypse had not even been presented yet. After thinking for a bit, the main character came to the conclusion that he had returned to a time when the game had not even been announced yet. The player's mind flashed back to the last seconds of his life in the game, and he came to the decision that he had to make Lester pay. Turning on his laptop, Jared began searching for the divine talent cards that were scattered around before the game even started. In Apocalypse, the system will randomly grant all players a talent when they log into the game. Rare divine talents can only be activated by finding the talent card in reality. Sky Fortune released 10 of these cards, which were randomly scattered around the world. If the layout of the cards remains the same, then the one closest to the guy is on the roof of the tallest shopping mall in the city. In order not to waste time, and not to miss the opportunity to get such a valuable item, Jared ran to the point of interest to him. After some time, he climbed onto the roof, clinging to the protruding edge with the last of his strength. Seeing the map ahead, floating in the air above the platform, the young man realized that he was right in his conclusions. But suddenly, an unfamiliar male voice was heard from behind, expressing surprise at the presence of someone else on the roof. It was the owner of the last card in a past life, Alex Robinson, the heir to the largest real estate company. Our hero was not going to give up his opportunity to a stranger, and said that whoever succeeded first would be the one who would own the card. At that moment, armed men ran up to Jared from all sides and pointed their guns at him. The attackers were armed, and without any negotiations with the young man, they simultaneously pulled the trigger. Several bullets flew at the guy at once, leaving practically no chance of survival. However, the young man still decided to try his luck and rushed in the direction of the treasured map. Jared decided to hide behind a platform that had an item on it that would make the game easier to complete. Jumping up easily, the main character found himself behind the building and the bullets hit the concrete. The player glanced at the clock, which showed that there were 5 seconds left until the start of the game. Realizing that his chances of winning the prize were getting slimmer, Jared jumped up in the air, hoping to grab the card. Alex, who was against this development, shouted at the guy not to touch someone else's thing. But it was too late, as the young man managed to grab the artifact, risking his health. The protagonist glanced down and saw one of Alex's subordinates preparing to fire. The bullet flew out of the barrel of the gun and was already a few centimeters from the player's face. However, luck was on Jared's side that day, as the clock showed exactly 12 o'clock in the afternoon. A huge dark shadow of an unknown creature began to form over the city. A few seconds later, she was transformed, and now all the inhabitants of the metropolis could see an unknown person. He roared the start of the game, and the main character's body began to dissolve into space. The game, obeying the boss's commands, asked the guy if he wanted to enter the apocalypse. Without thinking twice, the young man furiously clicked on the item in the notification, signifying consent to enter virtual reality. The young man's movement into the game began instantly, and thanks to this, the bullets did not hit him. The system has reported that player data is currently being loaded. The movement of people began all over the world, and no one understood what was happening and where their comrades were disappearing to. One after another, city residents disappeared right from the streets, coffee shops, and computer clubs. An unknown being extended his hand and told everyone to go towards the world that was meant for them. The first thing Jared saw when he was transferred into the game was a huge orange eye that was watching the newcomer. The young man looked around and stared at the eye, not knowing what to expect from it. The place where the main character ended up was huge, and inside there were only rocks and a pyramid with an eye. Suddenly, in the place where the pedestal had recently stood, something flashed, and only a golden pattern remained there. Looking closer, Jared saw that in the center of the drawing was a divine talent card. The young man approached the object and began to examine it carefully, trying to figure out how to get the artifact. But everything turned out to be much simpler. You just had to stretch out your hand and the object would drop into it on its own. Our hero was infinitely happy that he was finally able to get his hands on a card that would give him a big advantage in the future. The system congratulated the player on being transferred to the apocalypse, and then a golden-haired girl descended from somewhere above on wings. The stranger greeted the young man and said that she was a unique gaming spirit for him. After which, the beauty congratulated Jared on receiving a rare divine talent card for her own use. This skill allows you to copy other players' talents. Cooldown is 1 hour. The system reported that there were 3 camps in the apocalypse: elves, beasts, and humans, and asked which one the player would like to join. The young man thought about it, since his future well-being depended on his choice. In his previous life, Jared chose the human camp without a doubt, but now fate has given him a second chance. According to the terms, players in the human camp can increase their prestige rating by 20%, and this indicator is the most important. But then the spirit interrupted his thoughts, saying that she had something special for the main character. The next moment, a scroll appeared in the girl's hands, which was painfully familiar to Jared. Looking at the object in surprise, the young man asked where the dragon blood scroll could have come from. The guy found it funny that the item Lester wanted so much ended up not being his. The system notified about the discovery of an artifact, and the next moment, something incomprehensible began to appear behind the spirit. The game reported that a hidden dragon camp had been discovered, and the portal that had formed in front of Jared was the entrance to it. It was a great revelation for the main character that there are hidden camps in the apocalypse. But the young man, having learned about the opportunity that had opened up, did not hesitate for a second, and boldly stepped towards the portal. When the guy extended his hand towards the passage, energy lightning stretched out in all directions from his fingers. As soon as the main character was pulled inside, the portal shone brightly for the last time and then disappeared. Jared found himself in an ordinary train car, which was absolutely the same as in real life. There were several people standing around him who had just been transported here, and they were all looking at the new faces with interest. The young man remembered that in the past, the beginning of the game was exactly the same as this time. The other players, who were seeing everything for the first time, admired the design of the surrounding space. Some of the guys couldn't wait to get a mission and start fighting monsters. And the train continued to take all the newcomers further, into virtual spaces, where they were supposed to start their new life. The protagonist decided to start his journey by checking the characteristics that the new dragon race gave him. The race's unique skill was the flame of a hellish dragon, which could appear during an attack and deal 150% damage. Even though the occurrence of this effect was only 0.1%, its presence was still a plus for the player. Now Jared was determined to test his divine card and copy someone else's skill. The young man's gaze fell on a bald, strong man who was trying to convince another player to join his team. Extending his hand towards the stranger, our hero whispered to ask permission to borrow something from him. The guy placed his palm on his target's shoulder, after which he felt a wave of energy pass through his entire body. But then the bald man turned around and, throwing his hand off himself, discontentedly suggested that Jared was looking for a fight with him. The young man pretended to be embarrassed and apologized, saying that he had confused the strong man with someone else. The epic talent Treasure Hunter, which finds treasure chests within a radius of 500 meters, has been copied. Suddenly a male voice came from the speakers, welcoming people to the apocalypse and wishing them to enjoy the game. The man whose skill was copied suddenly decided to head towards the window with quite understandable thoughts. Our hero tried to prevent the stranger from breaking the window, for which he blocked his path. Jared asked the strong man not to act rashly, as it was very dangerous outside. But in response to his actions he received only a push and accusations of cowardice, since the bald man was sure that he was just in a game. Having broken the glass, the man turned to those in the carriage and offered to watch his battle with the monsters. However, as soon as the player jumped out, he immediately found himself in the mouth of a huge spider, whose eyes glowed purple. The system reported that the player was killed by a monster and no longer has the ability to be resurrected. Everyone was horrified by what happened, and only Jared knew the consequences of the inexperienced newcomer's decision. When the panic in the carriage had died down a bit, the main character warned the other passengers that this was not just a game. The guy told the people that if they died here, their business would die in real life too. Watching the spiders approaching out of the corner of his eye, Jared said that everything that was happening was a fight for life. A notification about the mission has arrived. Find a safe zone. Time to complete is 4 hours. Reward is the opportunity to revive. The young man, who had already been in a similar situation, reached his hand to the top shelf, intending to get some object. He remembered that in his past life, someone in the 7th carriage had used a safety hammer as a weapon. It ended up being a blue-grade weapon in disguise, made of cold and meteoric iron. Thanks to his hunter skill, Jared sensed that there was a treasure chest hidden inside the carriage. Having activated his special vision, the young man saw that the object of interest to him was located a few rows away. A few seconds later, the young man was already at the seats and bent down to check what he had found this time. The chest contained a dragon's breath potion. It was blue quality and was a fairly powerful weapon. The protagonist decided that it was time to go on the attack and activated his blade. Having flown out, the young man immediately cut down the monster that got in his way. The spectators on the train were amazed at the kind of dagger the young man used and how skillfully he handled it. Everyone knew that when surrounded by so many enemies, even if you have a legendary weapon in your hands, you have to try really hard. But despite all of Jared's attempts to reduce the number of competitors, they kept coming and coming. From the outside, it looked as if the young man really wanted to die and was attracting the attention of the spiders. But in fact, the main character had a plan, and he was waiting for the moment when all the monsters would gather in one place. The young man realized that the time had come and took out a potion from his inventory that was supposed to help him win the fight. After opening the jar, Jared announced that he would let the giant spiders try out the dragon's breath. Swinging, the guy threw the object towards the nearest monster, hoping for an effective result. The jar broke against the monster's jaws, and the liquid that was inside splashed in all directions. However, the next moment there was an explosion, and flames burst out in all directions, engulfing everything nearby. Jared started receiving notifications about his level increase, which brought a smile to his face. As a reward for eliminating the danger, the protagonist's inventory was replenished with 50 copper coins and a life potion. People couldn't believe that the guy was able to destroy all the enemies in one attack, and they decided that it was cheating. Jared made the decision that he needed to follow the map to the City of Hope and stuck to his plan. Suddenly, he heard loud stomping behind him, which meant that someone was following him and not hiding. Turning around, our hero began to look around and try to find the source of the sound. A few moments later, a man fell to his knees in front of the guy, begging him to save his daughter, who had been carried away into the forest by monsters. The young man thought about the request, since many players had disappeared in this forest. But there were many good things hidden there. But suddenly the one who had recently been human began to rise from his knees, and his eyes and mouth glowed red. However, Jared did not see this, as he turned towards the forest and went in search of the girl. Turning to the young man asked where exactly his daughter was, since it was difficult to find anything in the forest on your own. It was at this moment that the guy realized that there was no one behind him, and therefore no one would help him in his search. Not wanting to give up, Jared made the decision to move forward and take action as the situation presented itself. All this time, the main character was being watched, but he was unable to notice. In the end, the young man finally found the girl, who was wearing a yellow blouse, holding a lollipop in her hands and crying bitterly. Approaching her, the guy warned her that it was dangerous to walk alone in the forest, and then offered to take her to the village. Suddenly, a female voice was heard from ahead, the owner of which thanked the baby's father standing behind her. Jared looked in surprise at what was happening and the man who had recently begged for help, but now did not even approach his daughter. The woman's further words explained everything. She said that the man had brought her another catch. At this moment, the player received a notification about the mission. Rescue the girl, who needed to be returned to the City of Hope. The young man remembered that in his past life, many had stumbled upon this hidden quest while exploring the dark forest. Everyone who found this task happily took it on because of the experience and reward, and our hero was no exception. The opponent's hand suddenly began to transform. The fingers darkened and quickly stretched out. A minute later, a spider with a human body stood in front of Jared and asked him to stand still. The young man told the girl not to run away, promising to deal with the monsters and then take her to her parents. The young man began to activate his dagger in his hand, since he had no other weapon, and all hope was on it. Having jumped up, the main character ran towards his opponent, hoping to inflict at least minimal damage on her. But as soon as the dagger touched the monster's paw, the player realized that the spider had steel skin. A woman's laughter came from above, and she said that all the boy's physical attacks against her were nothing. Jared tried to run the dagger across the paw again, but it didn't leave a scratch on it. In order not to suffer from the actions of the half-woman, the young man jumped away from her to a safe distance. Suddenly, the spirit appeared and warned that the spider was a level 20 boss, and the young man lacked the skills to win. Looking back, the protagonist said that he was not going to leave here alone. Bowing, the girl warned that this was the only way to survive, and then asked him to do the right thing. But Jared wasn't going to give up that easily, so he moved on to the next attack with determination. The guy remembered that in the real world there was a video about a hidden chest nearby. He hoped that the box contained a book with a skill that would help him win. The main character activated the skill copied on the train and immediately unmistakably found the hidden chest. Spider-Woman appeared in Jared's path, but he didn't waste time on her and smoothly left the line of attack. Having run under the paws of the half-woman, the young man found himself almost at his goal. Turning around in surprise, the enemy realized that she was not the target of the attack now. When our hero found himself at the treasure, he immediately opened the lid to find out about the artifact that lay inside. Unfortunately, Spider was not going to wait for her opponent to gain an advantage and went on the attack. At that moment, Jared opened the chest and was convinced that he was right. The skill book, Lightning Chain, was waiting for him there. The skill released lightning that could bounce from enemy to enemy, dealing 200 damage. The young man immediately decided to test his new skills and attacked his opponents with them. Jared's first target was Spider-Woman, and he hit her right in the chest, which proved critical for her. A series of lightning bolts killed the villains one by one, and our hero emerged from the battle unharmed. For defeating the spiders, the guy received an epic weapon, a poisonous dagger, soaked in spider venom and poisoning the enemy. Approaching the little girl and taking her hand, the young man told her that he could now take her home. The town of Hope was crowded, so Jared held the girl's hand tightly so that she wouldn't get lost again. But one of the strangers in the crowd recognized the player and asked him about it and told his boss that he had found the man who had stolen the card. Alex Robinson stared at the kidnapper and ordered his men to keep an eye on him. When the guy brought the girl to her house, she thanked him for it and smiled sweetly and handed him the reward for the quest. It turned out to be the Ring of Talia, which increases luck by 55 points. Looking at the prize, Jared thought that in the game, the more luck the player has, the more generous the reward for the tasks will be. The main character's attention was drawn to a noise, the source of which was nearby. There was a boy there who was upgrading the weapons of the people who paid him a few coins one by one. Noticing the protagonist's surprised look, the player standing next to him explained that the Barker's talent is forging and improvement. At that moment, the master finished his work and to the admiring size, showed the result, a stylish and sharp sword. Jared decided that such a skill would also be useful for him, and he should try to get it. When the young man touched the stranger, the system notified him that an epic talent had been copied, forging and enhancement. The protagonist decided that he needed to immediately test his new abilities and took out the poison dagger. Having placed the weapon on the anvil, the player began to intuitively use the offered tools. He was able to level up his weapon to 15 and realized that he no longer had to worry about upgrading his equipment. The other players were openly envious of Jared, who had gotten a level 15 dagger, and an epic rarity at that. But then all the young man's strength disappeared somewhere, since thanks to forging the endurance scale reached a minimum. A spirit helper flew up to the young man and warned him that her master needed to go to the nearest tavern and rest. The tavern is a special place where players can rest and recuperate after a battle. Approaching the employee of the establishment, Jared handed him the money and said that he needed one room. As he walked into the room, the guy heard a couple of players discussing the completion of a quest in the dark forest and smiled contentedly. Lying on the bed, the hero decided that he needed to reach level 20 as quickly as possible, change his profession and become stronger. The young man intended to achieve all this so that his former best friend would pay for his betrayal. The next day, after fully recovering, Jared set out to find something that could level him up. But then he heard suspicious sounds behind him and demanded that the pursuer come out and stop hiding. Alex came out onto the path and said that the player was lucky last time, but now he would hardly be able to escape again. The difficulty was that the scoundrel did not come alone, but enlisted the support of his people, who were already trying to take the map. The opponents came a little closer to Jared, and then their leader gave the command to attack. But the protagonist was not afraid of this, as he was going to demonstrate his lightning chain skill to the attackers. However, the guy's plans were ruined. The lightning that began to form suddenly went out. Looking at his palms, the young man quickly came to the conclusion that silence had been cast on him, preventing him from using skills. Alex chuckled and said that the card thief would not be able to use skills for 2 minutes, so he should accept his fate. At that moment, a strong man ran up to Jared and, swinging his arm, delivered his strongest blow to his face. But contrary to the expectations of the opposing team, the cheater's health bar only decreased by 3 points. The enemies were impressed by the level of equipment of the main character and therefore froze in fear, looking at him. Due to the stupidity of his subordinates, Alex quickly lost patience and decided to enter the battle himself. Jared, having had a break, looked at the rich man's weapon and realized that it was a level 15 blue rarity. The enemy did not waste time and had already aimed his bow towards his opponent, hoping to get rid of him. Before he pulled the bowstring, Alex promised that the young man would not be able to stand so calmly against this weapon. A few moments later, a meteor shower of arrows rained down on the young man, against which he had no defense. The arrows caused pain with every touch and took away a large amount of health points. But this is exactly what Jared was after, since he needed to take significant damage to activate the secret ability. To defeat his rivals, the guy decided to use the unique skill of his race, Helldragon Flame. Our hero extended his hand in the direction of those whom the beast was supposed to destroy. The dragon breathed fire from its mouth and was able to rid its master of unpleasant company in one attack. As a reward for his troubles, Jared was given Alex's bow, which was left lying on the ground. Grabbing the weapon, the young man thanked the enemies for helping him gain experience and rare equipment. The system reported that the player had reached level 20, so he should go to the city and find a job change officer. After some time, the guy returned to the City of Hope, from where he had left only recently. In Apocalypse, there is a fountain of rebirth. If a player with a chance to revive dies, he returns to the fountain. Moving a little closer to Alex and his company, Jared thanked him for the Silver Moon Bow. Feeling anger rising inside, the rich man promised that someday he would take revenge for this. But our hero was not at all impressed by the threat from the enemy, and he moved on. Walking through the streets of the city, Jared saw a career change officer and approached him. The young man told the man that he intended to change his profession. Without asking any questions, the officer extended his hand to the young man and solemnly declared that the dungeon for changing professions was open. A portal shone like a scarlet funnel in front of the main character, and he took several decisive steps forward. The 7 great professions of the apocalypse are knight, berserker, assassin, mage, archer, priest, and beast tamer. The least popular profession of those presented is the beast tamer. Although trainers can make their beasts do all the dirty work, raising them is quite difficult. Jared didn't want to choose a tamer, since when raising beasts, all resources obtained are divided between the tamer and the beast. However, the most suitable professions for the dragon race are knights and beast tamers. The knight has a strong start and becomes weaker in the later stages of the game, which is why many players died in their past life. But the tamer is unique. Thanks to the divine talent, the player will be able to receive 10 times more resources than others. The young man made his choice in favor of the beast tamer and confidently headed towards the representative of this profession. Suddenly, a spirit appeared, who insistently demanded that she think over her decision again and make a more correct choice. But our hero rarely listens to anyone, so when the system asked a clarifying question about his profession, he confirmed his choice without a doubt. The game congratulated the young man, and then streams of purple energy formed around him. As a reminder of the choice he had made, a ring with a purple stone shining on it appeared on Jared's finger. When the guy returned to the game reality, the officer congratulated him on his successful change of profession. At that moment, a couple of friends passed by our hero, arguing over their failure in the City of the Dead. Jared thought that the City of the Dead was the first dungeon, and if he assembled the right team, then killing the boss would not be difficult. To the side, the young man heard some men recruiting players for the City of the Dead, and they already have one willing participant. A girl came up and announced her desire to join their team. The guy in the green sweater happily announced that they had just the right place for the beautiful magician and extended his hand to her. Jared jumped up and shouted to the stranger that he was also going to the city, and then asked to join their group. The man thought about it, as he doubted that the tamer could help in the battle. However, they needed another person. As a result, the group leader announced that he agreed to take our hero with him. The City of the Dead was a gloomy place, full of tombstones, and its plants were crooked and rotten trees. The man turned to Jared and asked why he chose to go with the tamer, who had the lowest damage. Awkwardly scratching the top of his head, the young man said that he chose this profession because he loves raising animals. Suddenly, from somewhere to the side, a sharp arrow flew towards the team of boys. Noticing the attack in time, all members of the group managed to dodge and save themselves from damage. Activating his weapon in his hand, the man warned his charges of the approaching enemies. Skeletons really did appear around, and their number grew with each passing second. The dead were relatively easy targets, as their bones would fly in all directions from a single blow. Turning to his partners, the leader shouted that he was leaving the ranged monsters to them. Understanding her task, the only girl on the team threw off her cloak and held her staff forward. The mage attacked the skeletons with fireball, destroying several monsters in one attack. However, the beauty left her back open, so one of the dead men was able to get to her from behind. At this point, Jared had already begun to use the skills that his beast tamer profession had given him. The guy summoned a flock of crows. This is a basic skill for the tamer, which summons deadly crows. Our hero's plan succeeded, and the girl was saved from the dead man who suddenly attacked from behind. Turning to the young man with an uncertain look, the mage thanked her savior. Jared ran up to his new friend and grabbed her wrist tightly, as he was worried that something would happen to her again. Approaching his comrades, the guy said that these monsters are undead and will soon be reborn, so they need to get out. The leader of their group mentally agreed with the tamer's words and ordered everyone else to move forward. When they approached the mission objective, Jared said that the tactics were simple. The knight aggroes the boss on himself, the rest deal damage from behind. The boss, looking at the guy with suspicion, asked how he knew everything so well, as if he had already been here. Realizing that he was giving himself away, the young man laughed awkwardly and said that he was saying all this because of his rich experience in online games. Approaching the entrance to the temple, our hero took out a poisonous dagger from his inventory so as not to waste time inside. However, the group's commander noticed the weapon and decided that all of the tamer's wealth should belong to him. Unaware of the insidious thoughts of one of his partners, Jared had already opened the door of the building and taken a few steps forward. When the young man realized that he could not hear the footsteps of the other guys, he asked them to hurry, since it was very dangerous to split up. But the vile commander had already managed to inform his accomplices about the plans, so they did not even go inside the temple with the boss. The next moment, the front door creaked, and turning around, the girls only saw it slam shut. Outside, a cry was heard from former comrades, who said that the couple could stay here, and that they would return soon. Jared immediately realized that they just wanted to get rid of them and then take the experience and reward for themselves. It was too late for the trapped players to escape, as the main evil of this quest had awakened. The villain, seeing that a pair of strangers appeared in front of him, immediately attacked them with an ice block. The protagonist instantly recognized the danger, and firmly grabbing the girl's hand, pulled her towards him, protecting her from the threat. Hearing a rumble behind them, the guys turned around, and the beauty thanked Jared for saving her once again. The system reported that there was a level 30th undead archmage in front of the mini-group. Rising into the air, the enemy cast a spell, which a moment later rushed towards the players. Based on his past experience, the young man guessed that they would not be able to withstand the boss's attack without a tank. Jared glanced to the side and suddenly saw 3 hooded heads sticking out of the floor. It turned out that the magician had used the summoning of souls, but it was not worth relying too much on them, since they would not last long. Summon Souls, a divine talent card that summons undead creatures to fight by your side for 5 minutes. Looking at his partner, Jared said that he needed just a little time. Having summoned the lightning chain, the guy said that he knew the weakness of this boss, and hoped to defeat him without any problems. But the girl was not going to sit on the sidelines, so she decided to do everything to help the main character. She activated a multiple fireball and aimed it towards the villain. Based on his past life experience, Jared knew he had to get the gem from the Archmage's neck. This is due to the fact that the stone is the source of the enemy's energy and his weakness. Taking advantage of the fact that the dead man was busy, the young man decided to activate the Tamer's powers. He summoned a flock of crows and directed them towards the main boss of this mission. The monster tried to defend itself from the attacks of the birds, but it took him a lot of time. Our hero continued walking towards his goal, and jumping up, he aimed to destroy the stone that was sparkling right on the enemy's neck. When the young man finally reached the energy source, he immediately broke it, and the dead man instantly felt it. Jared's next step was to cut off the monster's head, after which the system congratulated him on his victory over the undead. As a reward for winning, the player received the Staff of Flowing Light, which had the skill Icy Wind Cry, unleashing a blizzard. Holding the award in his hands, the young man showed the staff to his partner, after which they both looked at the object in fascination. Suddenly, Jared grabbed the item differently and handed it to the girl. Seeing her surprised look, the young man explained that this was a weapon for a magician, and besides, without her help, they both could already be dead. The men who had been standing outside all this time realized that the battle had stopped and decided to go into the temple and take the trophies. But as soon as the traders entered, they were amazed to see two guys who had survived against all odds. Wiping blood from his cheek, Jared wondered what his former comrades expected to see here. But the leader of the opponents was not going to give up so easily and ordered his subordinates to attack. Since all three men were sure that the magician and the tamer were on their last legs, they rushed into battle without delay. Feeling responsible for his friend, our hero stepped out in front of her, wanting to protect her from danger. When the enemy was very close, Jared asked him why these three were betraying their comrades. In the player's enraged face, the guy saw his former best friend, Lester. Knowing that the chances of winning were slim, the young man grabbed his girlfriend's hand, which made her blush. However, this time Jared did it to copy the girl's unique skill that allows her to summon souls. The tamer's choice fell on a recently killed undead archmage who knew how to use ice magic. Pointing the monster at the men, the young man warned that the traitors had no chance in this fight. The head, slowly becoming covered with an icy crust, did not understand where the newcomer got such abilities from. The system reported that all three players had died, and none of them had a chance to be revived. But then Jared felt the strength leaving his body, and losing control of himself, he began to fall to the side. The girl immediately ran up to him and, after examining him, came to the conclusion that her new friend's stamina was at a minimum, and he needed to go to the tavern. The fainted young man had memories in his head of how he once took second place in a game. After which, being a child, he started whining and told his father that he was already tired of these games and asked to buy something new. Turning away from his son and walking to the window, the man declared that as soon as Jared could win it, they would immediately buy him the game. The boy's eyes lit up and he declared that in that case next time he would definitely be first. Taking the game in his hands, the man slowly walked towards the exit, and the hero thought that once he got here, he would never play anything new again. Having come to his senses and sitting on the bed, the young man tried to understand how much time he had spent on recovery. When he stood up and poured himself some water into a cup, he noticed a small letter on the table. As Jared read the short message, he found himself slowly smiling. The letter, which thanked her for saving her and explained that she had gone to look for her brother, was from Allison Wood. The girl also said that all the trader's things are in the storage ring and may come in handy someday. The guy immediately activated the inventory, and after looking at the items, he came to the conclusion that that group had killed a bunch of players. Jared decided that now he didn't need to worry about equipment at all. All that was left was to find himself an animal. Turning on the map, he remembered that in the northern part there was a dungeon where beasts up to level 40 could be found. However, it wasn't that simple, so the player had to choose teammates who wouldn't act like those traitors. After a couple of hours of much effort spent searching for reliable partners, the young man realized that it was easier said than done, and then his attention was caught by a girl calling on people to join her guild. Jared realized that creating his own guild was the most reliable option for him, and he should try to implement it. In his past life, when he entered the game, he immediately teamed up with Lester and forgot that a guild was the best set of players. Approaching the woman, the young man said that he wanted to create his own organization. Opening her book, the NPC asked the protagonist to choose a name for his guild. Once upon a time, Jared's father told him that the creators of the game are a deity, and the players participating in the game are people who challenged God. Based on this assumption, the young man chose the name Hunting for the Gods. Now, the guy had a task: to recruit players and the best option was to go where there would be a lot of experts. According to the schedule, after the survival mission, the first competition among the remaining ones should begin. Jared realized that he couldn't find a better place to select members for the guild, and headed to the place where the registration would take place. The competition will be held in the form of a one-on-one duel, and the winner will receive 100 gold and 1 rare skill. As soon as the young man agreed to accept the mission, the game immediately transported him to a meeting of future participants. The presenter was already speaking from the stands, welcoming the girls and boys to the first duel competition in the apocalypse. Everything will take place in the Heavenly Arena, which could be seen from any part of the City of Hope. Jared stood among the other players, and while the host was talking about something, he tried to eavesdrop on their conversations. He came to the conclusion that he had slept too long, as there were several people nearby who were level 30. When the fights began in the arena, the young man watched the fighters with curiosity. The first to enter the ring were the assassin and the magician, who felt confident, and it was impossible to say right away who would win. The magician looked quite stern, and holding his staff in front of him, he attacked the enemy again and again. The man used Shadow Prison, which paralyzed the enemy and dealt shadow damage. Feeling that he would soon lose, the assassin, in desperation, offered his opponent money if he would surrender. But the fighter didn't guess right with the offer. Since money was not a priority for the magician at the moment, he thought that if only he had had 1 million some time ago, his company would have continued to live and not gone bankrupt. It was at the very time when the company was having problems that trouble happened to the people closest to him, his daughter and wife. Because of everything that happened, the mages who were now standing in the arena decided to start the apocalypse game. So now, after his opponent's offer, the anger in the man's soul stirred, and he said that he would never give up. The player delivered another powerful blow, which became decisive in this duel, and successfully advanced to the next round. Before leaving the arena, the magician shouted that everyone present would fall before him. Jared, who was watching the man from the side, came to the conclusion that he was quite good. The system reported that it had found a suitable opponent for the tamer, Joey Wilson. The young man realized that in his past life he had repeatedly encountered this name in the World Channel, which spoke of the power of his opponent. Wanting to meet the young man as soon as possible, Jared clicked on the battle icon. As soon as the guy entered the arena, Joey appeared before him, confidently declaring that it was time for the fight to begin. Noting that the enemy's HP level was lower, the knight suggested that our hero attack first. Looking at Jared tensely, the player repeated again for him to start the duel. Before starting the attack, the tamer asked not to look down on others, as the winner and loser had not yet been determined. As he drew his sword from its sheath, Joey said he respected his opponent's confidence. He was going to use Sword Guardian, which summons multiple sword souls, each of which can withstand 500 points of damage. The next moment, Jared was hit by the reflected damage of the skill and lost 200 HP. Our hero understood that if he wanted to inflict damage on the enemy, he first had to break through the 4 souls of the sword. However, Joey didn't care about his opponent's thoughts, so he prepared his weapon for another attack. Running up to Jared, the knight said that doubts give the enemy an opportunity to kill you. At that moment, the guy remembered that his inventory contained many useful items from defeated opponents. The young man chose the undead armor, which gave him the opportunity to not die if he received fatal damage. Feeling protected, Jared ran towards the enemy, as now his swords were absolutely not scary to him. Not yet knowing how the tamer had prepared for the fight, Joey declared that his opponent was finished. The game said that since the player used armor, he will not die, and in case of fatal damage, he will restore 10% of HP. 2 powerful forces collided in the arena, and neither gave in, so at one moment an explosion occurred. Joey was surprised that his opponent hadn't died from the reflected damage of the sword souls yet. Taking advantage of the knight's hesitation due to failure, the protagonist attacked and dealt him a critical blow with the poison dagger. The system reported that Jared had won the duel and congratulated him on successfully advancing to the next round. Approaching the boy, the tamer extended his hand and asked if Joey wanted to join his guild. With a smile, the former adversary asked for time to think, realizing that this decision had deep significance. When all the fights of the first round were over, the host congratulated everyone who had advanced further and announced the beginning of the second round. In the arena, 2 magicians were already preparing for battle, Allison Wood and the man who had recently defeated the assassin. The spectators, seeing the rivals, began to happily chatter, as thanks to the previous round, they could assess the strength of these two. The man, looking at Allison, said that he was not going to spare her just because she was a woman. But the girl was not going to waste time on empty chatter, and challenged the magician to show his abilities. Spectators began to approach the place where the battle between the 2 magicians was taking place, and watched them with interest. The rumor about the battle of the strongest wizards quickly spread through the crowd, and our hero also wanted to see it. Not wanting to waste time, Joey said that he would go to the gym, and if he needed it, he could write in the chat. Jared shrugged, thinking that his friend was an emotionless grind machine. Before leaving the game, the knight said that if the young man did not become a champion, he would later regret it very much. The young man, having seen Joey off, headed towards the arena, hoping to recruit another expert to his team. Making his way through the crowd to the combatants, Jared recognized Allison in one of the opponents, and her opponent was that powerful magician. The girl looked confidently at the man, and held in her hands the very staff that the main character had recently given her. The two duelists froze opposite each other, each not wanting to be the first to demonstrate their abilities. But Allison still gave in and summoned an icy wind, directing it towards Raymond. But the man only laughed, noting that his rival had a magnificent staff, which would soon belong to him. The girl advised her opponent to talk less until he won, otherwise he might feel ashamed later. A meteor shower rained down on Raymond, each meteor dealing 500 points of fire damage. After this attack, everyone began to give preference to Allison. However, our hero had a bad feeling. It was impossible to tell from the magician that something irreversible was happening to him now. On the contrary, there was a grin on his face. Suddenly, an explosion was heard in the arena, which frightened everyone present and made them watch the fight even more closely. For a while, the air around the people was filled with acrid smoke and an unpleasant smell. As soon as the area cleared from the effects of the explosion, everyone saw that Raymond had disappeared from the battlefield. However, he was not the only one who disappeared. Allison was also transported somewhere with him. After some time, the opponents appeared again in front of the audience, but the girl was lying on the ground, and the magician was holding her staff in his hands. Not wanting to leave his friend alone in this situation, Jared climbed over the fence and went to her aid. When the young man approached Allison, she began to apologize for losing her staff, but he ignored it. Having made sure that everything was okay with the beauty, the main character promised her to reach the final and return the staff back. After this, a series of battles and victories began, since the guy could not break the word he gave to the magician girl. After countless rounds, it was left to Raymond and Jared to fight for the championship title. When the two rivals came face to face, the man shouted at the tamer as if he looked scary enough. And then the magician took out his staff and, striking it on the ground, offered his opponent to take it if he could. After the object hits the ground, both participants in the duel are transported into a space of nothingness. The space of nothingness is a space where the creator increases damage by 30%, and the enemy's damage is reduced by 30%. Raymond stated that no one can defeat him here, plus it absorbs the chance of respawning, and after respawning the player remains here. But Jared was not impressed by his opponent's speech, and he tried to copy this talent. However, he failed. The next moment, the man was able to wound the player with a shadow arrow and lower the HP bar by 700. The main character thought that if a regular spell took away 1/3 of his health, he might die soon. A brilliant idea came to the young man's mind: to kill himself and use the only chance for revival. In front of Raymond's shocked eyes, Jared stabbed himself with a dagger, and the system reported his death. A moment later, the game sent another notification, which contained information about the guy's revival. The special space created by the man works in such a way that the player can respawn at the place of his death, and not at the fountain. To continue the battle, the young man used Allison's skill to summon his soul, thereby doubling his abilities. Realizing that the enemy now had a real chance to win, the magician became angry. Jared said that even if he loses one chance at revival, Raymond will not get away with it. At that very moment, a flock of crows flew at the man. There were so many of them that he barely had time to dodge them. Realizing that now was the perfect time to attack, the tamer informed his opponent that he was beginning. Rushing towards Raymond with the ghosts, the young man suggested feeling the difference in the attacks this time. The upstart realized that the boy was too fast now, which was very different from last time. The spirit and the protagonist both laid hands on the man and both used a lightning chain. A powerful electric discharge ran through the magician's body, preventing him from moving or breathing. The game reported that Raymond had been dealt 800 HP of damage by a double lightning chain. Not wanting to give up so easily, the man gathered his last strength and called upon another of his skills. Jared didn't notice it, but a sharp dagger was flying at his back at great speed. However, this attack was noticed by a spirit, who prevented the death of his master at the cost of his own life. Hearing a strange sound behind him, the protagonist turned around and saw that the ghost was slowly disappearing. The guy, angry at the unfair play, clenched his fists and ran towards his opponent. Catching up with Raymond, Jared grabbed him by the head and slammed him into the ice, causing it to shatter into pieces. Since the owner of the space suffered greatly, it began to crack and collapse. The young man, wanting to get out of here as quickly as possible, found a weak point and struck there. When the players are transported to the arena, the system congratulated Jared on his victory and acquiring the title of champion. The host immediately flew up to the main character, grabbed his hand, and raised it above his head, honoring the winner. The young man enjoyed the moment, not believing that it was all over and he had been able to withstand all the trials. Standing among the spectators, Allison looked at her friend with admiration and could not believe that he had fulfilled his promise. At this time, the presenter pointed to the chest and said that inside was equipment of historical rarity. The young man immediately rushed to his reward, hoping to get a new weapon, since it was time to change the poisonous dagger. When Jared opened the box, the system reported that he had received the Sword of Ice and Fire. At that moment, the guy realized that he had not wasted his chance to be reborn, as he had returned the staff and received a new weapon. After placing the sword in the inventory, the tamer told the mage that they can't act as they please just because they are in the game. Jared spotted Allison from afar and made his way through the crowd of fans shouting to join his guild. Having given his friend her weapon, the young man suggested that she wanted to find her brother, to which he received a positive answer. After which the player decided to look into the menu and saw that more than 100 people wanted to join his guild. People started to gather around where Jared was standing and asking him to add them to his group. Not wanting to deal with the crowd of fans, the young man grabbed his girlfriend by the hand and ran away. When they were able to break away, the guy thought that the number of places in the guild was limited, so he couldn't accept everyone. Suddenly a stranger approached them and began to stare intently at the girl, and the young man covered her with his body. Looking over the handler's shoulder, Allison recognized Todd Martin, a friend of her older brother, and asked where her relative was. Bowing his head, the man said that her brother was busy with something important, and so he left him to guard his sister. Seeing Jared's uncomprehending look, the mage explained that she knew this man and could trust him. Trusting his friend, the protagonist told his new acquaintance that they were going to the dungeon tomb of the Dragon Crown. Putting on a serious expression, Todd said that he would go with them without further ado. After some time, at the entrance to the dungeon, the group was met by Joey, who congratulated the head of the guild on winning the title of champion. Smiling at the knight, the young man suggested moving into the cave since all the team members were assembled. However, none of the group noticed that they were being followed, and these people did not have the best intentions. When the squad entered the dungeon, a long and bright corridor opened up before them, and statues stood on the sides of the walls. Allison walked up to one of them and began to look at it with interest. Suddenly, all the clay flew off the knight, and his eyes lit up with a scarlet light, and he no longer looked like a beautiful decoration of the hall. When the girl hid among her comrades, Jared reported that the main monsters of the tomb were in front of them. Calling out to Joey, the young man said that the guy would have to be the tank, and the rest would cover him. Before the fight began, the tamer ordered his comrades to stay close to each other. A moment later, one of the knights approached the group and swung his sword in their direction. As he went on the attack, Joey shouted that these tin cans would never be able to kill him. Having snatched the sword from its sheath, the guy confidently repelled the attack without experiencing the slightest discomfort. After which, the player's eyes lit up with fire, and he threw it into the crowd of former statues, confidently causing damage to them. He was followed by Jared, who finished off the remaining enemies, and Todd and Allison were responsible for long-range combat in the team. Hardly had all the wars ended when a stranger appeared ahead, who was on horseback, which was an advantage for him. The system informed the players that there was a level 35 Dragonblood Knight in front of them. Having looked at the team from above, he pulled out his sword and, giving the command to his horse, confidently galloped down. Keeping a close eye on his new enemy, Joey tried to formulate a plan that would allow him to win. The first thing the young man did was activate the sword's defense, and a ghostly knight appeared behind him. Having snatched another weapon from its sheath, the player prepared to meet an opponent who was clearly stronger than the previous ones. Joey used a level 2 sword Whirlwind, which deals 3,000 points of physical damage to all enemies within its radius. Realizing that his attack was successful, the knight put away his sword but still watched his enemy warily. The enemy, realizing that all his supporters had been destroyed, summoned Lord Shiger with his last strength. At this time, the moon rose over the Tower of Eternity, brightly illuminating it. Inside the castle, there were two people watching Jared and his team fight through a large screen. The man said that he sees in the main character a reflection of an old acquaintance who has long been dead. This is a story from days gone by, which the stranger preferred not to talk about. Intrigued by this similarity, the tower's owner decided that he should increase the difficulty of the test for the group. The system reported that the greedy dragon Shigyur had absorbed the power of his dead subordinates and had become a second-rank crown dragon. This fact didn't upset the young man at all, as it meant that the monster egg that dropped from the boss would be even better. However, all the other party members became scared as the dragon's attack began to reduce their HP at a critical cost. Realizing that he was the only one thinking sensibly right now, Jared gave Joey the command to use sword defense. Taking a few steps forward, the player looked closely at the dragon. The knight warned that the snake had too much damage and could only block one attack. Thanks to his comrade's warning, the moment the dragon's breath ended, Jared was already ready to attack. Looking back, the tamer threw to Todd to shoot at the eyes, since this was the only weak spot of the bastard. The guy used Sleep Arrow, which was laced with sleeping pills, and stunned the target for 4 seconds. Even though the arrow only hit the beast's face, it still had a strong effect on it. Seeing the dragon weaken, Jared shouted to his team to attack it while they had the chance. Joey drew his blades from their sheaths again and prepared to attack his enemy. Todd covered him from a distance, trying to aim for the snake's weak points. Allison also entered the battle, wielding her staff, summoned the ice wind cry, and froze the enemy. At that moment, Jared jumped on the dragon and hit him on the head with his sword, leaving no chance for survival. The system congratulated the group on killing the greedy crown dragon, rank 2, and gave the winners a reward. The tamer looked at the items with joy and said that a boss with a higher rank drops more loot. When it was time to distribute the prizes, the main character said that his comrades could take everything since he only needed the egg. Suddenly, a crowd of people entered the hall, who clearly did not just come to say hello to Jared's guild. The man standing in front of everyone pointed at the main character and ordered his comrades to kill him. The young man heard the order and, without picking up the egg, raised his head to see the arrows flying at him. But Todd rushed to intercept the shells and covered the unarmed protagonist with his chest. All the arrows hit the guy right in the chest, and if it weren't for him, Jared could have been hurt. As he disappeared, the young man explained that he was thus repaying his debt for saving Allison, who had once been saved by the tamer. With his last strength, Todd said that he still had a chance to be revived and promised to wait for the group in the city. Armed, Jared asked the attackers who they were and why they attacked from behind, like the last rats. And then another person began to approach our heroes, who had not been noticeable before, since he was in the shadows. This stranger turned out to be Alex Robinson, who promised that today the tamer would pay for everything he had done. Jared, touching his comrades, asked them not to interfere, as he had a personal score to settle with the impudent man. The young man cut his palm and held out his trembling hand. Blood from the wound flowed onto the egg, and as soon as it touched the surface of the object, it immediately began to shine with moonlight. A moment later, cracks appeared on the surface of the egg, and a ghostly dragon soared upward, immediately opening its mouth and roaring. Jared watched the events unfold, his eyes wide in surprise, wondering what to do next. Extending a bloody palm towards the beast, the player announced that he wanted to enter into a contract with it. In response to the offer, the beast silently extended its huge paw towards the boy's hand, and a column of energy burst out of the egg. When everything calmed down, in the place where the spirit of the powerful dragon had recently been, there sat a little boy who evoked tenderness. Our heroes looked at the result of Jared's labor with surprise, since no one expected to see a cub. In the opposing camp, there was also a momentary confusion about what was happening. But then Alex laughed loudly and began to convince everyone that it was possible to crush a dragon with one hand. As if to confirm the impudent man's words, the little snake released barely noticeable streams of fire from its nostrils. Suddenly, the dragon breathed a huge column of fire towards the enemies, which no one expected from him. The health bar of the people in Alex's group began to drop sharply, since none of them even thought about putting up a shield. Only a few people managed to escape, and of some only coals and bones remained. The remaining enemies fled, urgently using means of transport, as they realized that they could no longer fight. When the danger was gone, the baby went straight into the arms of his owner, wanting to receive praise for his help. After moving the beast onto his shoulder, Jared said that he regretted Alex's escape because he would not give up on his quest for revenge. Allison, not understanding what was happening, asked with obvious displeasure who dared to block their way. The young man assumed that, judging by the people's equipment, they might be from another camp or race, but what they needed was unknown. The sign that was on the clothes of the strangers also attracted attention and was quite memorable. Jared tried to figure out in his mind what such a symbol could mean, but nothing came to mind. When the group returned to the city, they were met by Todd, alive and well. The young man immediately noticed the dragon, which was on the tamer's shoulder, and rushed to examine it. The beast clearly did not like such abrupt movements, and he immediately tried to drive the stranger away. Suddenly, the game announced that due to the dragon's death, the world boss Golden Skeleton King appeared in Hope City earlier. Immediately after the notification, the sky above the settlement began to turn into a poisonous green funnel. Such changes in the world frightened even the dragon, who was shaking violently on his master's shoulder. A frightened Allison noted the monster's dramatic appearance and asked how strong it was. Not wanting to deceive his friend, the player reported that this boss was quite strong, and memories began to appear before his eyes. In his past life, the Skeleton King single-handedly destroyed half the city and killed almost 60% of the players. However, the new Apocalypse City will open only after killing this boss, and there the hero will be able to find Lester. Somewhere far from the City of Hope, a man laid eggs in front of the chief and reported that another dragon had been taken by a tamer. The stranger also reported that all this happened in Zone 886. Having let go of his subordinate, the man headed towards the hidden room, and lightly pressing on the door, entered inside. The room contained a collection of eggs, which were carefully arranged on several shelves. The system announced the arrival of the Golden Skeleton King boss, and asked the players to protect the City of Hope. The monster sincerely apologized to the dragon for being late, and then promised to avenge him and kill all the people. Acid smoke began to appear around the skeleton, which did not bode well for anyone present. And then, like cockroaches, dead men armed with swords ran out of it. The game notified that players must stop the invasion, and the 3 players who deal the most damage will receive rewards. The most unpleasant thing about this situation was that if it failed, everyone in the area would die. Jared knew that, just like in his previous life, he absolutely had to deal as much damage as possible and collect good loot. Turning to his friends, the guy said that the enemy was moving slowly. They needed to keep their distance and use long-range attacks. Looking at the king, the main character said that if everyone listened to him, they would definitely win. The young man told Joey to distract all the mobs while the rest went to the boss. Gradually, the 2 armies drew closer to each other, and the situation among the people became tense to the limit. Watching everything from above, the monster gave his soldiers the command to destroy all living things. The next moment, the 2 armies met and a fierce battle began. There were also healers on the battlefield, and one of them was now trying to heal the guy, not seeing that a skeleton was running towards her. But the girl was saved by Jared, who cut the dead man to pieces, and advised the stranger to return to the city. After his words, the young man, under the watchful gaze of his savior, ran back to the king. The enemy did not lose strength, and additional forces from his side were drawn to the place where the battle was taking place. The protagonist told Joey to destroy the organized formations of the skeletons. The knight didn't need to be told twice, so he drew his sword from its sheath and threw it into the orderly ranks of the enemy. Skillfully swinging his weapon, the young man reduced the number of dead people each time. Not far from the battle, there were envious people who did not want Jared's guild to get all the reward. The head of the competitors ordered his subordinate to contact other leaders who would help resolve this issue. However, envy consumed the man from within, and he, closely watching the tamer, decided to summon a fireball. Feeling that he was being attacked, the young man decided not to waste time checking it out, but simply dodged with lightning speed. When the danger had passed, the player nevertheless turned around and, seeing a crowd of strangers, asked what they were doing. The man with the insolent eyes declared that he could not allow the God Hunt to take the world boss reward for themselves. Rolling his eyes in displeasure, Jared suggested that the dissatisfied ones go and take the prize with their own strength, since the boss was in front of them. While the heads of several teams were arguing among themselves, the boss took advantage of this and got as close to them as possible. The Skeleton King, swinging at the people, promised that he would send them all to hell. When the monster struck with its weapon, all the people closest to it were swept away by the shockwave. Only Jared remained standing, unable to understand why he was still alive. And then, seeing movement from the side, he saw the same girl he had recently saved from the dead man, and she covered them with her shield. Suddenly, Todd's cry was heard from the side, warning his miss of danger. Hearing her friend, Allison tried to run away, but realized that her feet were stuck in the ground. At this time, the king began to approach her, already holding a sword and about to attack a new target. Realizing that he didn't have time to come to his friend's aid, Jared shouted to her about the danger, as if that could change anything. The monster's face was already next to the girl, and it seemed that only a miracle could help her. But suddenly the weapon, which was rushing towards the victim's body, was stopped by a counterattack. The Skeleton King was resisted by an unfamiliar young man who stood right in front of him without any fear. Looking at the enemy with fury, the boy ordered Allison to run away and leave this monster to him. Noticing the man about to fight him, the skeleton laughed and said that he could not win. However, this statement did not frighten the stranger, and he asked the monster to show him all his power. Looking straight into the eyes of the main dead man, the young man prepared to attack. Jumping up, he began to strike the enemy with quick movements, trying to inflict maximum damage. But all these actions brought too little result, since the boss's health bar did not decrease even by a third. As if to confirm these words, the king laughed and declared that all the attacks were just like tickling. Looking at his opponent with a smile, the player asked him not to be so self-confident, as this was just a warm-up. Suddenly, the guy activated Berserker mode and every second lowered HP by 1%, but increased damage by 10. The next second, on the spot, changing form, the young man jumped up and ran towards the enemy. Having dealt a series of blows that were more serious than the previous ones, the stranger was approaching his victory over the king. As the dead man fell to the ground, the berserker laughed and asked if he still felt ticklish from the attacks. Not wanting to hear himself mocked, the skeleton stood up and attacked the man in revenge for the previous humiliation. However, the opponent expected such a reaction and was already prepared to meet a counterattack. Those watching the battle from the sidelines were worried about the safety of the player who appeared unexpectedly and helped them. Jared assumed that the stranger relied on spending HP, but his health was almost at zero and any mistake would mean death. Trying to quickly destroy the strong opponent, the skeleton launched a lightning attack towards him. When the weapon touched its target, the force of the blow raised a cloud of dust across the battlefield. But as soon as everything that obstructed the view disappeared, the monster saw that such a hated enemy was alive and even standing on his feet. With a grin on his lips, the player suggested that the king continue in the same spirit, because for him, his flame was nothing more than a tickle. The secret to the stranger's success was his use of a skill, Immortal Body, which made him invulnerable for 1 minute. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the young man paused and decided to think about his battle tactics. Jared was impressed by the guy's strength, since not everyone can stand up to the Skeleton King alone. Having come to some conclusion, the berserker raised his weapon and grinned eerily. The next moment, the stranger jumped up and shouted to the enemy that it was now his turn to attack. The young man flew up and rushed towards his opponent, pointing his sword in his direction. With a well-timed attack, the player cut off the king's head, which meant victory and the salvation of the City of Hope. After making sure that there was no more danger, the boy deactivated the berserker state. As a reward for the victory, the guy received the Ring of Undead, which increases all characteristics by 10 points. The skill was Death's Power, which meant that every kill of a player would increase the attribute by 50%. When the protagonist thanked the stranger for his help, he replied that he did it only for Allison's sake. As if to confirm these words, a girl immediately ran past Jared, brushing his face with her hair. The magician hung on the guy's shoulders and, calling him brother, asked where he had been for such a long time. After patting his sister on the head, Kevin said that he was okay, and then offered to let her take the ring she had won. The system congratulated the players of Zone 886 on protecting the city and announced the opening of the demonic tower. Moving towards the chest that appeared, the berserker told the others to follow suit and get their well-deserved rewards. In the box, the players found the Golden Soul armor, belt, and bow of the undead, which they distributed according to their professions. Allison took the golden cloak for herself, and Jared the boots, which increased her movement speed by 100%. Once everyone had sorted out the rewards, they were transported to a new city that they had yet to explore. Everyone was delighted with what opened before their eyes, especially the height of the towers. Jared remembered that the Demon Tower had 100 floors, and only those who passed it would be able to move on to the Ion Tower. In a past life, during the 8 years of the apocalypse, our hero was able to go only 50 floors, since the monsters in the tower are dangerous. Looking a little further, the young man saw the Ion Tower, and he became interested in what was actually there. At this time, the man who was watching the players who had passed through the portal let out a satisfied breath. He was on the top floor of the Ion Tower, watching the events unfold from the window. The stranger informed the girl standing behind him that the real game was just beginning. People ran past our heroes, hurrying to the tower, as it was supposed to close in a few hours. Jared said that the tower opens every 7 days, and they should try to get through a few floors now. After receiving consent, the young man touched Kevin's shoulder and led him in the right direction. In fact, the young man copied the player's divine talent, Immortal Body, with his action. Demon Head is a solo dungeon, and for a while all party members will have to split up. The first to go inside was Joey, who used every chance to increase his level. Jared thought with displeasure that as soon as his friend found a place to fight, he immediately went in that direction. But quickly dismissing such thoughts, the young man suggested that the remaining boys follow the knight's example. Allison, being a mage, takes longer than others to pass the tests on the first floor. Joey, Kevin, and Todd confidently approached the end of the 3rd floor, killing all the monsters in their path. The one who got the furthest was Jared, who had just finished the battles on the 5th floor. As a reward, he received wild boar boots, gloves, and also upgraded his level to 40. When the young man was on the 7th floor, he easily destroyed all opponents, which could not but please. But then the main boss of this floor began to appear on the battlefield, who looked stronger than all the previous enemies. It was Warrior Sin, level 55, who was unhappy because Jared had disturbed him during lunch. Warrior Sin is the commander who led the demons during the invasion of the city, but after the failure, he was imprisoned in the tower. The young man was surprised, since he was supposed to meet this monster only on the 15th floor. Before the attack began, the warrior said that his opponent would have to become his lunch, because due to the noise he had to let him through. The first to attack was Dragon Arksar, who used the breath of a black dragon. This only caused laughter from the demon, who said that such a light would never harm him. These words left the main character dumbfounded, since he had no other trump cards. Realizing that there were less than 3 minutes left before the tower closed, Jared drew his sword and attacked the monster. However, the warrior was much stronger than the guy, so he repelled the attack and hit him in the stomach. The game sent a notification that the tower would close in 10 seconds, and all players would be moved out of it. Taking a second to catch his breath, Jared tried to understand why this opponent had become so strong. Realizing that he was about to disappear, the player pointed his sword at the demon and offered to show him everything he was capable of. This provocation angered the monster, and he, raising his weapon above himself, ran towards the guy, shouting "Die." But when the warrior reached the place where the opponent had recently stood, only a slight glow remained of him. When the young man returned to the gaming space, he sighed with relief, as he understood that he was a second away from death. Everyone was already at the meeting place except Kevin, and this fact made Allison very worried. Todd tried to calm the girl down and said that his brother might have urgent business, so he left without waiting for them. Looking down thoughtfully, the beauty expressed hope that her comrades were right in their assumption. The game notified about a new task, Guild War, which will be in the City of Origins. The reward for victory is a teleportation device. If you put a teleport in a good place, you can do nothing and collect taxes for using it. Jared also thought that such a reward would help him find Lester faster. Looking carefully at his team, the main character said that everyone should have a good rest before the new battle. Before parting ways, the guild members agreed to meet here in 4 hours to go on a mission. As Allison and Joey moved away from the group, the tamer approached the remaining 2 and offered to join the guild. Rose was clearly delighted with the prospect and immediately agreed to join Jared's team. Todd, a little flushed with embarrassment, also agreed, saying that he still needed to protect Miss. Smiling at the new members of his guild, the young man thanked them and said goodbye. While going about his business, the protagonist thought that since all the positions in the guild were occupied, it meant that they should win this war. Kevin didn't understand why he wasn't being transported to his comrades, since the time allotted for completing the tower was over. Raising his head up, the guy saw a male figure that he had never noticed anywhere before. A masked man appeared, holding a naked sword, and then told the berserker that it would be better for him not to come here. Tongues of acid flame began to appear around the stranger, and cutting the air once with his sword, he headed towards Kevin. The young man, not wanting to show his fear, asked the enemy who he was, an NPC or a player. Running sharply towards the berserker, the stranger said that both options were incorrect, and it was not at all necessary to know the correct one. Feeling that he was facing a strong enemy, the boy decided to activate the immortal body skill. The man, hearing what abilities the player was going to use, widened his eyes at him in surprise. At that moment, the sword was already a couple of centimeters from the young man's neck, but he didn't even try to dodge. Suddenly, the enemy made a sharp dash in the opposite direction and found himself far behind Kevin. But the young man thought it was just a trick and went down on one knee to protect himself. However, the attacker no longer had plans to attack, as he heard familiar words from the player. Looking sideways at the young man, the man thought that before him was the owner of divine talent. Realizing that no one else was attacking, Kevin asked why his opponent had stopped. The stranger promised that he would let the guy go if he didn't tell anyone what happened, and let them in on the secret of the apocalypse. Seeing the interest in the berserker's eyes, the man approached and placed his hand on his shoulder. He went on to say that the apocalypse would soon be a catastrophe in which no one would be able to survive. But for now, this could be avoided. However, in order to be saved, a number of conditions must be met, which not everyone can do. But the man refused to name them, saying that Kevin had to find out everything on his own. After finishing the conversation, the man headed into the forest, informing that the player would be able to leave the tower in 7 days when it opened. Looking after the mysterious stranger, the boy thought that he had committed the attack after learning about the divine talent. At this time, in the game space, the God Hunters Guild was transported to the competition site. Noting that all his comrades looked well rested, Jared suggested that they try a little harder at this task. The head's words were met with smiles and cheerful laughter, maintaining a positive atmosphere in the team. Players who die on a mission will not lose their chance to respawn or get equipment, but will have their crystals taken away as payment for this. The event will last for 4 hours. The guild with the most crystals guarded by monsters will win. Before entering the competition, the team decided to develop a strategy to follow. Having activated the virtual tablet in his hands, the young man prepared to write down the main points. Jared said that since they were outnumbered, they needed to split up and capture as many points as possible. The next moment, there was no one near our hero, as everyone wanted to quickly take their positions. Having reached the places where the crystals so necessary for victory were located, the guys began to destroy the enemies. One by one, the points were cleared, and the team members simply remained in these places to protect themselves from the rest of the guilds. Jared was informed by the system that he had captured a level 3 water crystal mine. The young man looked with interest at the creature he had just destroyed and forgot about controlling the area. Allison walked around the cleared area, trying not to miss a single rustle. However, the third-ranked Gate of Communication Guild was already watching her nearby. Their leader watched the girl with narrowed eyes, and then said that every God Hunter mine was weakly protected. Having decided to take the caves captured by his rivals for himself, the man gave the command to his subordinates to attack. Jumping on top of Allison, the attackers announced that where they were coming there was no place for outsiders. One of the guild members summoned tree roots that wrapped tightly around the girl and prevented her from moving. Wanting to get rid of his rival as quickly as possible, the man ordered his comrades to kill her. Hearing what they were going to do to her, the girl looked at the speaker with hatred, mentally wanting to destroy him. At this time, Jared was attacked by a huge monster with huge fangs hanging from its mouth. But then a distress signal came from Allison, which the players agreed to use only in emergency situations. The young man immediately realized that his friend had been attacked and was in mortal danger. The player was distracted by a notification from the girl, and suddenly another creature appeared behind him. Taking advantage of the fact that the man did not see him, the beast attacked him from behind, spewing icy breath from its mouth. However, Jared did not completely lose control of his surroundings and heard suspicious sounds. Arksar, who was sitting on his shoulder, turned around and used Dragon Flame. While the pet was dealing with the enemy, our hero put on the golden boots for speed. Looking at the animal, Jared declared that this place would now be under his protection, since he needed to leave for a while. After making sure that Arksar understood him, the tamer took off, since every second of delay was dangerous for Allison's life. The stranger regretfully announced that he would have to kill Allison. Suddenly he heard a strange sound from the side and had to turn his head. Upon seeing Jared, the entire guild rushed towards him with the desire to finish off the scoundrel. But our hero was better than his opponents, and instantly scattered them in different directions. Wanting to avenge the attack on his friend, the Tamir prepared to fight the leader. With a loud crack, sharp snags emerged from under the ground. The enemy boss growled and promised to kill Jared. However, our hero easily eliminated the dangerous trees and prepared for battle with the man. The next moment, the young man ran up to the enemy and pierced him with his sword. By eliminating the warring guild, the player received 500 crystals. Walking up to Allison, Jared looked at her tenderly, and then checked to make sure she was okay. A male voice was heard from the side, admiring the romantic scene. Suddenly, Ron glanced at the girl and said that he was glad to see her. The impudent fellow nudged our hero in the shoulder and declared that Allison belonged to him. Not wanting to listen to nonsense, Jared took his friend by the hand and led her away from the madman. Ron threw back at the couple that if the tamer beat him in a duel, he would receive 10 third-level mines. The young man angrily asked the impudent man to leave before he got hurt. The guildmaster of the despised heroes was dissatisfied with the neglect towards him, and used tenfold speed. Worried more about Allison than about himself, the hero hid her behind his back. Attacking, Jared said that as soon as he destroys Ron, he will immediately take on his guild. But then the young man realized that he had overestimated his strength. The tamer's chest was cut by the opponent's sword with an unpleasant sound. Smiling, the man said that the boy could not compare with the legendary talent. Not believing what she was seeing, Allison felt her heart begin to beat wildly with anxiety. But the enemy didn't take into account that Jared had something better: divine talent. The pain did not stop the young man from getting rid of the blade. Ron screamed in disbelief that no one could escape his sword. Looking at his opponent with a predatory look, the tamer said that he wanted to see him without his legendary talent. The leader of the scorned heroes couldn't believe that his opponent was still alive. The thought flashed through the man's mind that this was just an illusion. Ron turned around and hysterically called for help. Seeing that they obeyed him, he gave his subordinates the command to finish off Jared. The tamer realized that the impudent fellow had originally planned an ambush. In response, the player furiously yelled at the guy to shut up, since he was going to die today anyway. The enemy guild began to activate their skills, but the young man was only happy about this, as he hoped to get more crystals. All the attacks were aimed at Jared at the same time. However, appearing from behind the smoke, he only laughed and suggested that they continue. The opponents did not understand where such a monster, whose body absorbed all damage, came from next to them. The tamer grinned and announced that it was his turn to attack. The entire space around was filled with a river of fire. The attack was so powerful that all enemies were instantly eliminated. Before he disappeared, Ron said that he would never give up his mines. For his pompous speech, the impudent man immediately received a punch in the face, having received 1,000 crystals for his victory. Jared shouted at the end that he had not expected anything else from the man. There was a sound of stomping and heavy breathing behind him. Concerned, Rose immediately asked how her comrades were doing. Allison recounted the tamer's heroic deeds, looking at him with devotion. Even after defeating 2 guilds, the God Hunters were only second in the overall rankings. Jared decided that they had to take first place, but to do so, they would have to steal mines from their rivals. Hearing her friend, the mage immediately handed over Todd, saying that he was a professional archer. Unexpectedly for everyone, he became sad and said that he would not succeed. Once upon a time, as a child, the boy took part in important competitions, and he was only 1 arrow away from victory, hitting the center of the target. However, Todd's expectations were not met, and he fell into terrible despair. The boy was met with insults and no one supported him. At those moments, he felt like the most useless child on earth. The guy even admitted the thought that those screamers were right, and archery really wasn't right for him. But this is all in the distant past. Now his teammates believed that he was the best archer. What were his shots worth in the dragon's lair? Todd's soul was filled with light. Feeling that they believed in him, the player promised to try. Standing on the edge of the roof and taking aim at his opponents, the archer seemed to have returned to that very day. In the distance were the targets guarding their crystal. Todd took a deep breath and braced himself. An imaginary target appeared in front of him, and Ron was supposed to bring in the most points. In a moment, the arrow flew off the bowstring, and the golden area spread around Todd in golden waves. Unaware of the danger, the scorned heroes praised each other and tried to boost their self-esteem after losing. But the arrow was already close. Ron's face twisted ugly as the projectile pierced him. Todd, as if having made up for that ill-fated day, was more pleased with himself than ever. Having jumped down, the guy began to look for his next victim. Jared cheerfully shouted to the others that it was time for them to go hunting and adjust their rating. By confidently striking, the player replenished the treasury of his guild. Meanwhile, there are 50 seconds left until the end of the competition. Time was becoming less and less. Our players were short 2,000 crystals to win. A few swings of the blade and a couple of arrows fired. The system notifies about the end of time and congratulates the God Hunters on their victory. Everyone knew that they became champions because of Todd, so he was showered with compliments. Ron was worried that the loss had made him look worse in Allison's eyes. At this time, the prize for the winners was already smoothly falling into their hands. Everything inside the chest was incredibly beautiful and sparkling. Looking at his catch, Jared was already thinking about the prospects thanks to it. As he passed by, Ron dismissively remarked that the race of others from the Gods Guild had been watching the tamer for a long time. An unpleasant chill ran down the guy's spine. Ellie approached and asked what these words meant, to which the young man suggested that they were talking about the guys from the dragon's tomb. Night enveloped the city. Loud footsteps echoed across the empty square, but the comrades who were walking were already being followed. Walking quickly past the girl, the stranger pushed her hard in the shoulder. A barely noticeable movement of the hand and it's ready. A clever theft helped the thief get hold of a powerful ring. Only assassins have this ability. Dissatisfied exclamations came from behind the girl. It was at this moment that Allison discovered that her brother's ring was missing. A loud stomping sound ahead made all the friends turn their heads. Quickly understanding everything, Jared gave the command to grab the stranger. But she turned out to be more agile, and accelerating, she jumped onto the building. Glancing slyly at her pursuers, the girl began to disappear into the teleport. The tamer told Todd, who ran up, that the thief had been transported to the City of Moonlight. Jared told himself that it wouldn't hurt him to visit this interesting place. To improve the talent of the dragon race, you need the prestige of 3 camps, and you can get it in the new city. The leader said that he was heading to a new city, and the rest would stay here to wait for Kevin to appear. He decided to set the teleportation coordinates here so that he could return here instantly. An order to the gatekeeper, and Jared is pulled into the portal. Unexpectedly, the guy was charged 100 gold pieces for moving to a new city. This amount of tax came as an unpleasant surprise to the player. But these thoughts were quickly discarded, as a plaintive cry for help was heard from behind. The little pink toy lay sadly on the ground. At this time, her owner tried to defend herself from the thugs. The man smiled predatorily and asked why the girl had sat down, since she had recently been trying very hard to run away. Preparing for the attack, she covered her head in a feeble attempt to protect herself. But then the sound of metal clanging against metal was heard above the girl. The aggressor shouted at Jared angrily that he didn't understand who he was dealing with, but the tamer said that no one should hurt the girls. One swing and the opponent's sword flies into pieces. This frightened the enemy, and their commander gave the order to retreat. The men ran away with such speed that it was definitely difficult to catch them now. When Jared approached the girl, she admitted that she stole items from the boss from those guys, which is why they were chasing her. The guy was surprised and asked who these people were. The stranger reported that these were members of the Guild of Gods, and they were keeping everyone in this city in fear. And then the puzzle in the tamer's head came together. He realized that these were the same people in the tomb. Turning around, he waved to the girl and advised her to go to a safe place. But Jared immediately realized that he now had a tail. Looking into his eyes with devotion, she said that she was scared. Rolling his eyes in despair, the young man waved his hand at the girl. In response, the little girl introduced herself as Arya and promised to be useful. When the partners got to the hotel, Jared sadly had to pay for 2 rooms. Having brought the girl to her room, he waved goodbye to her and went to his room. And then he experienced the best feelings of the day. He lay down on a soft bed. At night, the door creaked barely audibly and opened slightly. The light from the hallway fell on the face of Jared, who was sleeping peacefully. A heavy atmosphere began to fill the room. Taking out the dagger, Arya thought that soon all the guy's money would belong to her. A wave of the hand over a defenseless body, and the anticipation of profit. The attack and a feeling of disappointment overwhelmed the traitor, but she was not going to give up and prepared herself for a new blow. Suddenly, Jared jumped up from his seat and, screaming about the idiot Lester, tried to hit Arya. Having run to a safe distance, the girl put her hand to the burning place of the blow. Turning to the young man, she justified her presence in his room as a nightmare. Pretending to believe her, the tamer offered his friend to sleep here, promising to look after her. However, the guy was not going to forget what was happening, and intended to follow the guest. When morning came, our travelers set off further. Arya led the guy to the church, where, according to her story, the members of the Gods Guild hid. But then a stranger crept up behind her and looked at her appraisingly. The boy extended his hand to the girl with unknown intentions. But then Jared turned around abruptly and recognized his former friend. Since the tamer called him by name, Lester's shock immediately showed on his face. Rage flared up in the young man's chest, and it resulted in the traitor receiving a punch in the face and a request to mind his own business. Lester flew back and knocked down everything in his path. Realizing that he had a strong opponent, the player stood up as quickly as possible. The guy angrily asked how Jared dared to hit him. Arya looked at her partner with concern and asked him not to provoke the opponent, as he was very dangerous. But the player said he didn't care at all. The tamer thought that in his past life Lester was a traitor, and in this life he mocks the weak. At this time, the enemy used the concealment skill to attack. There was only rage and a desire to finish off the stranger in his eyes. Assassin's concealment makes the player invisible and hides their scent, allowing them to deal damage from a blind spot. Jared tensed, as he would have to be more careful. The player experienced a moment of fear. In his past life, Lester relied on this same skill, so history repeats itself. A friend who was not a friend. Wild pain in the chest, the last breath and death. And this time, this cannot be allowed to happen. Came through Lester to die at the hands of Jared. The main character had no intention of giving his former friend a chance to win. The traitor did not understand how the enemy knew his next move. He didn't know that his every move had already been studied by the tamer several years ago. Jared suggested testing whether Lester was strong enough to kill him. The assassin thought he had stumbled upon some madman. Swinging his sword, the young man shouted that the enemy was going to hell. But then something unexpected happened. Lester felt a wild sense of confusion and fear at that moment. In a moment, both men disappeared. Jared rushed after the kidnapper, not wanting to lose his prey. The pursuit lasted for a couple of dozen minutes. The road led the comrades to the very church where the Guild of Gods was hiding. Understanding her comrade's goals, Arya asked him to be more careful. In response, she saw only a determined look and a bold nod. The girl said that there should always be a backup plan, and then handed Jared a sleeping pill. The guy was surprised and asked where the child got such things. She said that a solo traveler should have the means to get rid of opponents. The young man caught the guild members who suddenly appeared instantly. After suggesting that the men lie down and sleep, the tamer knocked them unconscious. Without thinking twice, the boys changed into soldiers' clothes and, pretending to be casual, headed to the church. A few steps separated them from the entrance. At this time, Lester woke up and tried to figure out where he was. Suddenly he heard laughter, and then the stranger said that the guy had a funny fate. The player, alert, asked what the man wanted from him. But he said that from that moment on, Lester simply kept quiet and complied with all demands. Arya and Jared approached the guards and said that they had come to relieve them. The men believed them and began to give instructions on how to carry out their duties. With a heavy clanking of boots, the deceived guards began to move away. Suddenly a loud voice declared that now was not the time to change. But Arya acted quickly and the stranger was enveloped in a veil of sleeping pills. The men tried to object, but they didn't have a chance. The girl told Jared that the person he was looking for was inside. With a determined look, the guy said that in that case they were coming in. But then something confused him. Declaring that her mission was accomplished, Arya removed her guardian uniform. The next second she ran out and slammed the door behind her. At the exit, she was met by guards who thanked her and handed her a bag of coins. The girl thought rather contentedly that she had forgotten to warn Jared that in this city, deceiving others was a common thing. The guy at this time analyzed and realized that Arya's goal was not to steal the ring, but to force him to come here. Now the tamer was curious about what awaited him. Suddenly, torches on the walls burst into purple flames. Thanks to this, the young man noticed several strangers ahead. One of them confidently declared that he could handle the brat himself. His partner warned that if the boss decided so, then he must have had his reasons. But the strong man said that in 5 minutes he would crush the boy. A confident step towards Jared. And then the enemy prepares to attack and takes out a weapon from behind his back. One swing and a blade flies towards the tamer. He approached the young man with astonishing speed. Jared even had time to admire his opponent's strength. But deciding it was time to join the fight, the player summoned a flock of crows. The birds began to furiously attack the strongman, thereby distracting his attention. The young man watched this with satisfaction, realizing that after improving the skill, the number of crows had doubled. However, the red-haired one quickly overcame the obstacle. The opponent shouted that it was impossible to defeat him with such skills. The enemy tracked all of Jared's movements and attacked without stopping. Our hero decided to change the sword's attribute from flame to ice. The boy hit the floor, covering it with smooth ice. Cursing, the man looked at the landing site with frightened eyes. Feet slid on the slippery surface. A headbutt on the floor knocked out the opponent. All the strongman could do now was look at the stars before his eyes. The remaining guild members decided to help their partner. The blonde rushed forward, activating his skill. The protagonist's legs were wrapped in white bandages like a spider web. In a moment, the guy's entire body was immobilized. The second man summoned a wall of bone spikes and commanded them to grow. Jared knew that if he didn't regain his ability to move, he would crash into the spikes. The only way out was to summon the dragon. Arksar instantly appeared from the portal, preparing to defend his master. For his rivals, the boy's possession of such an animal was a surprise. The dragon immediately attacked the members of the Gods Guild with a river of fire. The enemy had to admit that he had not underestimated Jared. Taking advantage of the fact that the blonde's attention was drawn to the lizard, the player immediately attacked him. The boy said that he was too strong for a man, and it was better for them not to fight anymore. Jared patted Arksar on the head and congratulated him on reaching rank 1. The opponents knew that their target was stronger, but they would have to fight, as the boss left them no choice. Armed, the 3 men ran towards the tamer with victorious cries. Realizing that the opponent had the numerical advantage, the player activated the immortal body. Shock showed on the red-haired man's face. With the support of his beast, Jared began to confidently attack his enemies. There was no room for doubt in the guy's soul. After a few minutes, the fight was over in favor of the tamer. But then another unknown person appeared on the battlefield. He gave the order to his men to move away. The strong man tried to ask for another chance, but in response he received only a furious look and a repetition of the order. Feeling pain all over their bodies, the 3 losers began to rise from the floor. As they left, the men threatened that Jared would be in trouble at the next meeting. And then the boss of these guys suddenly said that he was glad to meet the main character again. He suggested that this wasn't Jared's first apocalypse. A swarm of different thoughts swirled in the young man's head, but outwardly he remained unperturbed and pretended not to understand what was being discussed. The head asked to stop the performance and said that everything became clear from the guy's actions at the beginning of the game. Realizing that Jared was in an aggressive mood, the man said that he had a business proposal to work together. As a reward, the tamer will receive better equipment and riches, but if he dares to refuse, he will never leave here alive. The young man warned that if all the wealth was obtained through the misfortunes of innocent people, then he would refuse. At that very moment, 2 dragons rushed towards the hero. Jared knew he had no more aces up his sleeve, so he decided not to take risks and not to fight blindly. Luckily, the player set the transfer coordinates in the City of Dawn. A few seconds before the attack, the guy activated the teleport. The arch shone among the ice and fire. The stranger, watching his enemy disappear, thought that next time he would not let him get away. Turning around, he said that Jared wanted to kill Lester because he was a reincarnator. The boss said that most likely the tamer will take revenge for his past life. Panic began to choke the assassin, as he understood that no one would let him go just like that. Coming closer, the blonde man suggested that Lester kill Jared first. This player was driven by the desire to gain power over all living things in the apocalypse. Once safe, the young man was able to breathe a sigh of relief. The guy couldn't understand how that stranger knew about reincarnation. But then an assistant appeared and said that the player needed to rest. At the tavern, Jared chose the quick recovery service for 20 gold. Everyone around him didn't understand where the boy got so much money. At this time, Ellie and Rose were trying to figure out where their friend had gone. Suddenly the girls heard a guy's voice from behind, who declared that he was safe and sound. He bitterly admitted to his girlfriend that he was unable to return the ring. Jared said he asked Todd to find out something about the thief. Quick footsteps were heard nearby. A shooter appeared from around the corner and announced that he had some bad news. Todd said the stolen ring would be auctioned that night. Jared thought that the thief would have to be there too. He decided to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, find better equipment, and return the ring. It was unanimously decided to go to auction. The auction host spoke from the stage and promised that incredible things would be presented today. After telling his friends to go to the gym, Jared promised to come back later. The player decided to visit a hidden store with good items. After some time he was there. The saleswoman met him and asked what the client was interested in. The guy gave a code that gave access to things of interest. Hearing him, the girl said that she had opened a hidden menu. The tamer began to look at the goods provided with interest. Even though the price of the potion was high, Jared was now confident that the auction would go smoothly. Having done all his business, the player returned to the auction. The first lot for 100 coins, a sheepskin scroll, did not interest anyone. At that moment, the guy approached Ellie, who said that the ring was not there yet. Seeing that no one was interested in the lot, the presenter suggested moving on. But then Jared remembered that in his past life, the guilds were ready to kill for this scroll, and he raised his hand. Having received the item, the player already understood that with its help, he would gain access to a secret mission. And then the girl showed off a new item, that ring. One of the participants was indignant, saying that no one could voluntarily give up this thing. Ron was also present in the hall, bringing a guest with him. The guys started discussing how they could get their ring back. The stranger said he would take the item for any amount. The unknown guy was outraged that the beast race dared to come to the city of people. Not wanting to endure humiliation, the beast jumped up and attacked the impudent man. Looking at the others, the guest said that he had the right to be here. The guy responded by saying that the enemy only knows how to swing his fists. Approaching from the side of the people, Jared declared that the ring would be his. Ron decided to eliminate the enemy with someone else's hands, and asked to put him in his place. Isaac Wolf stated that if the tamer went against them, then death awaited him. Turning to the boys, Jared asked them to make more noise. The players were happy because they were up to the task. Todd and Joey began to stir up the crowd, emphasizing that the beast race had no rights to this territory. With each passing minute, the level of anger in the room rose. When the battle began, Jared began to implement his plan. The guy drank an invisibility potion that should last for 3 minutes. He also took out a smokescreen potion and a fire potion. The tamer swung his arm and sent them into the crowd with a precise movement. In the midst of the fight, only the presenters did not understand what to do. They had no idea that someone was already targeting the lot nearby. A transparent hand reached for the ring, and the next moment the tray was empty. Laughing wickedly, Jared put the object on his finger and looked slyly at the beast. A second later, our hero smoothly went on the attack. To the thug's surprise, he found himself on the floor. Ron ran up to his guest, clearly worried that he would have to answer for what happened. That is why he became the tamer's next victim. Jared jumped up and found himself on top of the pile of people he had created. After being notified that the potion had worn off, the boy decided to leave. At this time, his friends took advantage of the guest's position and happily kicked him. Once in a safe place, Jared called his comrades there. As soon as she saw the guy, Allison immediately asked about his condition. The player said that he was fine and then showed the ring. However, the item stolen from the auction returns to its owner after some time. But this is exactly what our hero was waiting for. The young man was going to teleport after the thing to the thief. Before he was transported, Jared promised Ellie that he would return the ring. The next moment, everything around burst into flames, and the guy disappeared. The tamer waited impatiently for the moment when he could see the thief's face. The ring fell into the small palm. The girl didn't understand why it came back to her, but suddenly it began to shine in an alien way. In a moment, in front of her stands the deceived guy, who came to take revenge. Not knowing what to answer, Arya simply stuck out her tongue. Jared lunged forward, shouting something about pulling the thief's eyes out, and his goal was very close. A real fight broke out between the rivals. There was a fire of excitement burning in both of their eyes, but everything was ruined by a foreign sound. Ron's guest burst onto the court, wanting to avenge his disgrace. Jared forgot that the beast race could smell its prey from miles away. Judging by how tense Arya was, she had also encountered this opponent before. Suddenly, she hung on our hero's arm and began to beg for help. However, the beast was pleased with this and said that he would arrange a common funeral for the couple. The beastman's aura was fearsome. Acting contrary to her words, Arya disappeared into thin air. The enemy did not waste any time and attacked our hero with a beastly roar. In one attack, Jared lost a lot of health and was at risk of losing. The rival demanded that the Tamir give him the girl. Otherwise, these would be the last minutes of his life. As he prepared to attack, Isaac claimed that he had seen the couple hugging there recently. Hearing such a lie, Jared threatened to sue for it. Rage clouded the beast's eyes, and he growled that he was confident in his words. Some time ago, a couple confused the man's gaze, and his imagination painted what he could not see. Isaac said that if it weren't for him, it was unknown how far the two would have gone. Jared sighed heavily and concluded that the enemy could not be convinced. Without wasting any time, the guy changed the attribute. A powerful push from the ground, and he is already close to his opponent. Attack, and Isaac loses 300 HP. However, the opponent acted as if nothing had happened, and he had simply been tickled. Hearing the man's words, Jared immediately jumped back. But the beast resolutely began to reduce the distance, announcing along the way that he was going to show the difference between them. Isaac screamed loudly, and fiery whirlwinds rose up around him. The enemy reported that the lower Jared's HP, the higher his own damage. Out of desperation, the tamer decided to drink a health potion. He barely had time to do this when he received a powerful blow to the face. But to the enemy's surprise, the guy's health bar was intact again. Seeing Isaac's surprised face, Jared, with excessive pride, suggested continuing the fight. But hidden from view, Arya knew that no potion would help against the man. The Beastman confirmed this, saying that advanced potions would not help the young man. After which, the enemy called upon the skill, Bloodthirsty Fury. This is a legendary talent that increases damage by 100% and causes attacks to restore health over 1 minute. The young man was frightened by the amount of HP that Isaac restored. Jared tried to dodge the attacks and did not have even the slightest opportunity to go on the offensive. He mentally thanked his past self for buying the health potion. The man promised that today the boy would find out what happens to those who stand in the way of the bloody gates. The player came to the conclusion that trying to wear down the enemy was not the best plan. Turning to Isaac, the boy asked if he really considered himself invincible. The tamer, who went on the attack, only caused the man to laugh. However, everything was not so simple. Activating the skill, Jared confidently rushed towards the enemy. Thinking that the boy was about to lose, Isaac raised his weapon to strike. The man assumed that the trainer enjoyed beatings, but the axe in his own shoulder only made the guy smile. The beast man assumed that the enemy had drunk the wrong potion and gone mad. In response to this, our hero stated that since Isaac likes to suck the blood of his rivals, now he can do it as much as he wants. Seeing him begin to become covered in a fine web of veins, the enemy asked what was going on. No longer expecting an attack, Jared explained that it was a poisonous potion that took away health. He held out a health potion with a sly smile and offered it to his opponent. The man understood that he had been deceived, but he could no longer do anything about it. The beast only hoped that the opponent's HP points were lower, which meant that he would die earlier, but Jared broke him here too. The player activated the immortal body, which gave him an advantage. As if mockingly, the protagonist said that he had a more effective potion than all those that Isaac had. Realizing that he could make a profit, Jared offered to buy the liquid. Not wanting to lose the chance of resurrection, the player agreed to the offer. Bowing down, the boy declared that since they were not friends, the price for the enemy would be 50,000 gold. Realizing that there was no time to bargain, the beast agreed, but warned that he had a couple of thousand less. Easily agreeing to this reduction in price, Jared took the money and handed over the potion. Isaac began to bring the bottle to his mouth with impatience. However, his plan was not destined to come true. Arya's gaze burned with a thirst for revenge on the offender. Realizing that his last chance for salvation was lost, Isaac threatened to kill the girl. But the player's body was already paralyzed by poison, and he could not move. The assassin confidently went on the attack, knowing that nothing would stop her now. Isaac understood that his death was already rushing towards him. Before taking revenge, Arya revealed that she had been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. With the sound of tearing flesh, the dagger entered the beast's chest. Jared understood that since Isaac had a chance to be revived, he would now take revenge. Turning to the girl, the tamer asked why she had returned. Arya closed her eyes and screamed that she was scared because these beastmen had come to the City of Dawn to kill her. Ron watched the couple from afar and quietly envied that there was another beauty next to Jared. But the fact that his patron Isaac died spoiled his mood even more. Sensing that things were getting hot, the man decided to slip away. However, a cry was heard behind him that no one was letting him go. A male voice reminded him that Ron's debt had not disappeared. Activating golden speed and taking advantage of the element of surprise, Jared attacked. Keeping the enemy under control, the young man asked why the beastmen had come to the city. Ron said he only knew about their search for the girl and returning the map. The tamer wondered what kind of card could make the beasts come to the human city. Suddenly, Arya said that she received this card after the murder in Extreme Ice City. The girl said that it looked like a divine talent card. According to the conditions, a player can have only one talent. This might be why Arya can't activate this card. But then the guy remembered the words about murder and thought about it. Divine tier cards can be transferred between players, and the way to obtain them is by killing the owner. Ron asked to be released, arguing that he had told everything he knew. But now, because of the knowledge he had gained, Jared couldn't let him go. Blood splattered in all directions. The game informed that Ron had no chance of resurrection. Suddenly, Arya asked if her tamer was afraid, to which the guy said that as long as the Bloody Gates considered them accomplices, it was not in her interest to get rid of him. Jared offered a deal. Arya gives him the ring and the map, and he forgets everything that happened between them. Pretending to agree, the girl handed him the items. Leaning towards him, the assassin asked if the player wanted to return the ring because it was important, or because of that sorceress. Without waiting for an answer, Arya told the guy to take the thing. However, the map still remained in her deft hands. Turning away, Jared asked his partner not to tell anyone about the map. In response, the girl asked him to get out of the city as quickly as possible for his own safety. The guy smiled and said that this stupid big guy wouldn't be able to defeat him. At this time, the Hunters Guild also managed to win the battle. But one enemy survived and screaming tried to kill Allison. One warning cry and a weapon flies towards the beast. Our hero couldn't allow his girlfriend to get hurt. In an instant, the last enemy is defeated. Seeing the leader, the girls immediately ran up to him and began to check his condition. Wanting to please Ellie, Jared immediately told her about the ring. Once the initial curiosity was satisfied, the tamer said they needed to raise their level. He knew that once the secret of the divine talent cards was revealed, he and Allison would be in danger. After some time, all the guys were able to reach level 50 and gained access to profession promotion. Now their guild's goal was to surpass the maximum level. The guy thought that he needed to quickly improve his skills, since his current strength was not enough to protect himself. One swing and the next player flies away. To begin the second test, you need to get 20,000 points. But no one has been able to do this yet. The examiner invited the next person who wanted to come to her. The woman looked at the crowd questioningly. Jared stepped forward and couldn't stand by. The opponent focused the player's attention on the little one above. The game informed that to pass the test, the tamer must score at least 20,000 points in 10 minutes. The flying thing turned out to be a scoring robot. After listening to the instructions, the young man used golden speed. After tracking the player's trajectory, the examiner hit where she thought he would appear. Jared said he wasn't that predictable and decided to go on the attack. He directed chain lightning towards the woman. Effectively hitting and dodging the attack gave the guy 2,000 points. Spectators could not believe that the young man received so many points at the start. Not wanting to let her opponent pass so easily, the examiner attacked him with the Void Hammer. The hit its target, costing Jared 2,000 points he had earned. The members of the God Hunter Guild were very worried about their leader, but they continued to believe in him. Allison knew from experience that her friend could always do what others couldn't. At this time, the young man stood up and tried to come up with a new plan. He shouted that the woman would never be able to hit him again. In his past life, because of the Void Hammer, Jared challenged the officer 200 times but never passed the test. But the guy wasn't worried about it, since he had gained combat experience. The young man decided to use the opportunity of his profession, sharing vision with summoned beasts. Jared's attacks now became more confident. He, seeing everything from the side, left the line of attack in time. The woman could not understand how the subject predicted her blow. While the officer was amazed at the player's dexterity, he was collecting points to pass the test. The young man hoped that in this way he would be able to finish everything quickly. All this time, a raven was flying over the arena and passing the picture to the owner. At this point, the examiner realized that the successful fight was related to the birds. Enraged by this trick, she attacked again. However, this time the target was not only the main character. Jared realized this too, and in the raven's eye, a hammer with a pink paw was already reflected. The next moment, the bird, which did not have time to fly away, flew down from the impact. The player realized that he could no longer rely on dodging to gain points, so something more effective was needed. The young man activated the dragon's Hellfire and Lightning Purgatory. Each discharge of electricity gave him 1,000 points. After some time, the system notified Jared that he had passed the test and that his class had been upgraded to level 2. Only our hero's friends were happier than his. At this time, important events were taking place in the Moon Castle. The young man shouted that he felt stronger, and the man standing next to him was glad about this, because now he felt that he could finish off Jared. Troy informed Lester that several other people would be traveling with him. As if on command, a small group entered the hall. The chief said that he had given his men the best equipment, and then announced that Lester would be the commander of the operation. A purple and white scroll appeared in front of the guy. Troy promised that the item would help in a difficult situation. However, it could only be used once. Leaving the boss, Lester gave his group the command to set out. As he watched his subordinates leave, the man said that now Jared would greatly regret not obeying him. At this time in the City of Dawn, the God Hunters Guild was happily discussing the passing of the Tamer's test. The guy promised that he would take everyone to training tomorrow to pass the exam. Todd approached his friend and asked him to demonstrate his new skills, but the young man promised to do it in the dungeon. New abilities are demonic substitution, removes the control effect and leaves a demon doll in the owner's place. Suddenly footsteps were heard ahead. Raising their heads, the boys saw Jared's main enemy, Lester. The player assumed that his former friend had become bored and had come here to die. Enraged, the enemy declared that this time he would not let the Tamer escape. He ordered the group to block Jared's partners and promised to take him on himself. People from the Gods Guild began to choose opponents for themselves as a pair. Joey was amused by the situation and prepared for battle. A moment later, the first opponents were already engaged in battle. The enemy was impressed by the speed with which the swordsman attacked him. To protect himself, the man released the fabric upwards and, clinging to the roof, moved onto it. The next stranger stepped forward, declaring that it was his turn. He dropped sharply to the ground, choosing his target. Unfortunately for Rose, the man attacked her. All her comrades rushed to her, wanting to save her, but the girl could only scream helplessly. Jared wanted to follow everyone, but he realized he couldn't move. He was trapped in shadow slavery, which made him unable to move for 10 seconds. Lester, not wanting to waste time, immediately attacked the guy from behind. Before he thrust the sword, he mockingly asked how Jared would resist him now. He swings his arm and the weapon moves towards the handler. And then our hero had to use a new skill. Finding himself behind, the Tamer decided to attack. Chain lightning hurt Lester. However, thanks to his equipment, he remained unharmed. Bouncing away from Jared, the guy said that because of this armor, he couldn't be hurt. And then the villain took out his daggers and used Star Purgatory. Realizing that he would not be able to defend himself, the Tamer summoned Arxar. Jared thanked his pet, saying that things would have been tough without him. The Tamer ordered the dragon to attack the enemy with Stormwing. The beast immediately went on the attack, sensing its owner's anger. Lester had to take the full brunt of the blow as he was unable to dodge it. Jared said that his beast evolves with him, and with just one piece of equipment the enemy won't survive the fight. Arxar's claws approached the boy's body. A moment later he found himself trapped in the monster's paw and unable to move. Lester was angry at Troy for not warning him that the Tamer had passed the second rank test. And then the young man remembered about the scroll. He realized that this was his last chance to win. Lester reached into the inventory and found the item he needed. Having taken it out, the guy became bolder and suggested that Jared show all his strength. After activating the scroll, a portal appeared on the square, from which a dragon's head immediately emerged. The monster immediately sank its teeth into Arxar's side. With a loud roar, he threw the beast high into the air. Jared's pet, pierced by fangs, ran into a wall and destroyed it. Lester was glad of such support, because now the second-level dragon was no longer a hindrance to him. And while the Tamer was trying to get through to Arxar, Lester was approaching him with bad intentions. At this time, the guys tried to somehow help the captured Rosie. Allison took out her staff and activated the hail. The opposing team left the skeleton to deal with this. The man held out the bone block in front of him, which protected the gods. It looked like the spines of a hedgehog, which were made up of bones. But Todd didn't like the aggressive behavior towards his miss. The guy decided to protect his mistress. The archer's shot shattered the shield, depriving the enemies of their advantage. And for Rose, this became a chance to escape. While the magician holding her was distracted, she broke free and ran to her own people. Not wanting to let his victim go, the man sent Spring Darkness after her. However, Allison also had the ability to put up shields. Turning to Joey, the girl realized that he was okay, but then a lot of bandages flew in his direction. It felt like the player was being enveloped in a cocoon. The guy was not afraid of this and confidently cut through all the fabric with his sword. And after that, he attacked the overconfident opponent. After a while, Joey turned around and walked away. The young man informed the uncomprehending enemy that the swords on his belt were not for decoration. Having settled accounts with one, the Hunters Guild still had 3 opponents left. But then the magician said that their plan had already been completed, so the guys shouldn't rejoice. Suddenly, the earth began to shake. The city was filled with the menacing roar of a dragon. And then the partners realized that all this time they had been distracted from what was happening to Jared. While his friends were fighting the rest of the villains, our hero tried to come up with a plan for his salvation. He realized that he couldn't save himself by running away and decided to attack. Jared was determined to put an end to all old and new grievances. Seeing the tamer rushing towards him, Lester declared that the Dragon Emperor's breath would turn them into ashes. The guy was sure that even if Jared used the immortal body, his dragon would still burn. But the hero used Soul Link. The damage received by the beast is transferred to its owner. The boy ordered Arksar to attack the right wing of the enemy dragon. The beast followed the order, and blood gushed in all directions. The dragon roared in pain, and also lost 1,500 horsepower. But what was strange was that Lester also suffered a similar injury. Noticing this, Jaster suspected that something was wrong with the Dragon Emperor. And then he realized that in front of him was an illusion, caused by a contract. At this moment, Lester looked at his hand in horror, and did not understand what was happening. The hero felt that the effect of the immortal body had ceased and descended to the ground. He informed his enemy that there would be side effects for using the scroll. Lester shouted that things couldn't end this way. Feeling desperate, the former friend declared that even if he died, he would drag Jared to the grave with him. And then the assassin announced that he was giving all his strength to the dragon. He intended to destroy the tamer and the entire city. People nearby ran away in terror. Jared said that in this life, Lester is an even bigger piece of shit than in the last. In response, the villain laughed and said that he would kill the tamer again today. The player thought that the assassin had completely lost his mind. The dragon swung its paw and sent the player flying upward. At that moment, Jared saw the scroll and the paws, and knew that it had to be destroyed. The guy ordered Arkasar to cover him. At that moment, he prepared his weapon and jumped towards the object. There was a loud and unpleasant sound. At that moment, Lester began to disappear, but still shouted that he could not lose. But the joy of victory was overshadowed by Jared's pet. The guild members who had managed to find the leader looked at him with concern. The guy swore that he would definitely find a way to save Arksar. The hatred for Troy in Jared's soul grew even more. He promised himself that he would make the villain pay for everything he had done. The next day, the tamer ran as fast as he could through the forest. He knew where to get a potion that would heal any wound. Arksar is in a state of weakness, which prevents him from being summoned to participate in combat. Only Leia could do it, a girl who possessed valuable knowledge and opportunities. Jared had already approached her in his past life. Once he got all the ingredients, the NPC made the potion. And when the guy was on the verge of death, she got him drunk. Turning around, the girl asked in surprise if he was looking for her. Jared demanded the diary with the ingredients for the potion, which shocked the healer even more, since she had not told anyone about it. Quickly coming to her senses, Leia tried to tell about the diary. But she was interrupted by a young man who said that he knew everything about the 3 ingredients and how to make the potion. The blonde asked how the guest knew what she wanted to say, but in response, she received only a wave of the hand and a retreating back. The first ingredient to mine was the essence of life in the demon's head. Leia said it would take half a month to get all of this, but he promised to arrive in a couple of minutes. Allison watched what was happening from afar. Looking sadly after her friend, she mentally decided to get the rest of the ingredients. After some time, Jared reached the tower. Pushing aside everyone who wanted to get inside, the player ran to the door. Showing impatience, the guy began to demand to be let inside. The entrance opened and the knight was inside again, a weakening blow to the leg. Jared said he didn't have time and demanded to be shown the passage to the next floor. The monster roared as he recognized the brat who had gotten in his way. The young man decided to use another new skill, and to distract attention, he activated Replacement. This time, Jared used Soul Search. Soul Search summons a demon that knows the enemy's weaknesses. Pictures began to dance before the player's eyes. What the hero saw surprised him a little, but then the game broke the Soul Search, as it went beyond the limits of what was permitted. Jared didn't understand how the monster got memories from the real world. Thanks to the demon, the enemy lost consciousness and stopped interfering. Going further, the young man saw 2 portals, which is quite unusual. The passage to the next floor was blue, so Jared decided to enter the red one and check out what was there. As soon as the guy entered, the stranger received a notification about a break-in on the 30th floor. This brought a satisfied smile to the man's face. he started exchanging data. This was done in order to move to the NPC and personally fight with the main character. The game notified the player that they had reached the 30th floor. The young man was surprised by where the portal led him. This saved a lot of time since the essence was found here, but the plan to quickly pass the test was ruined. A purple portal began to appear in front of the hero. The system reported that the enemy on this floor is a level 60 fallen angel seraphim. The enemy immediately began to prepare for an attack. Angel said that if a player dared to challenge the 30th floor, then absolute pressure awaited him. The fight began abruptly. The guy was surprised that Seraphim used this from the very beginning. All this time, Kevin was lost nearby. He was unconscious, but woke up when he was hit in the face with a stone. Not understanding what was happening, he sat up and cleared his throat. He remembered that he was on the 8th floor, but what was he doing here then? He glanced to the side and saw Jared. This made me wonder again what was going on here. He thought that what was happening looked like suicide. At that moment, the hero, who had come under attack, was trying to understand where so many bones came from. The game revealed that the bones were skeletons from the time when Seraphim massacred the city of Dawn. And then a brilliant idea came to Jared's head. This was the chance. Upon touching the ground, the player used Ellie's skill. He told the dead that they could avenge themselves. The young man used the spirit summoner. With a wave of his hand, the hero gave the command to those summoned to rise. And then the guy ordered them to surround the angel. The people who once died clung to their killer. Jared took advantage of this and headed towards the essence. The woman realized the player's plan and shouted that she would not allow him to get the substance. Seraphim raised her hand and lightning flashed around her. She summoned the Thunder Realm, a storm that lasts 10 minutes and deals damage to all enemies every 3 seconds. Each blow destroyed one dead person. As soon as they ended, the angel decided to move on to Jared. The woman pointed her palm in his direction. The guy saw what happened to the skeletons and froze in fear. At that moment, a purple beam captured him. Having caught up with the enemy, Seraphim raised her sword over him to finish him off completely, but the hole in the stomach prevented this from happening. Jared's savior turned out to be Kevin. The system roared that damage had been done to the carrier, so consciousness would be turned off. Having been transported to the tower, the man thought that he would soon meet the young man again. After the angels disappeared, the clouds in the sky began to disappear. After receiving the essence, Jared asked Kevin what he was doing there. Without waiting for an answer, the tamer thanked his friend for saving his life. At this time, the man broke his mistakes in battle. He asked the elf Apocalypse to recreate all the scenes of the battle. During the fight, the stranger liked everything. The ending, the blade pierces the NPC's chest. However, something interested the man. An unknown guy carried the second player onto the battlefield, and the observer saw this man's face for the first time. All this time, Todd was nervously walking around the entrance to the tower and waiting for the leader. And then he heard footsteps coming from the entrance. These were the guys who were talking about Ellie. But then an archer intervened in their conversation and reported the disappearance of the girl. Jared asked the boy to remember whether or not the magician's behavior was strange before he disappeared. He remembered that last night the miss had stood in front of the statue with her eyes closed. And the tamer reported that it was a prayer quest. Prayer is a task in the game. To complete it, you need to pray for 3 hours. The reward for the quest is Oneros, a dreamstone. But the stone itself is useless and can only be used as decoration. However, if you water it with the spring from Mengling Villa, you can get a dream flower. The villa was located in Extreme Ice City. Jared asked Todd to send him a message, and then they realized through experience that messages do not leave from here. The thing is, the villa belongs to the deity of dreams, and he created a protective formation. Players cannot exchange messages while within this field. Jared asked his friends to stick together, otherwise it would be difficult to find each other later. At this time, somewhere Ellie was fighting with the dream spirits. The monsters rushed forward using Dream Grasp, but the girl's partner, named Denise, was able to detain them. Then Allison stepped in, summoning Ice Storm. Thanks to this skill, enemies received significant damage. They were easy to deal with. In an instant, the desired flower blossomed over one of the monsters. The second girl from the team rushed towards him and tried to take him. Denise shouted at her and tried to stop her. However, it was already too late. The guy explained that after the death of the spirit, there is a chance that a blood flower will appear. And then a charming female voice was heard over the clearing. She suggested that the travelers go home. 3 pairs of eyes stared at her in confusion. But then the demon reported that, according to her information, people did not have a home. And after that, the woman suggested that they stay here forever. Suddenly, the woman took the form of Ellie, as she had the highest level out of the entire team. From the side, Eliza began to sob and ask for help. But then the magician realized that all flowers live in darkness, and logically should be afraid of light. A well-aimed throw towards the fiery flowers. A second later, the beautiful clearing turned into burnt weeds. Eliza understood her partner's actions and immediately shouted at the monster. As a priestess, the girl was able to summon solar radiance, which caused a beam of light to appear and heal her teammates. Allison's new acquaintance was about to breathe a sigh of relief, but was cut off mid-sentence. A cloud of arrows flew towards their small team. The magician managed to save Eliza, and the arrow pierced the monster through and through. And then a crowd of people appeared on the battlefield who were clearly hostile. The girls realized that the strangers had come for the reward that would be given to them after defeating the Bloody Flower. Allison asked the rebellious Eliza to remain silent and just watch the battle. But then new characters appeared, the Bloody Gates Guild. They also did not want to give the monster to anyone, and fell upon those who had arrived earlier like an avalanche. Approaching his partners, Dennis whispered that the Beast People liked to intimidate ordinary players. Allison knew that if Isaac recognized her, their group would become a target. They began to move away smoothly, but it was at this moment that the enemy turned his attention to them. His gaze was drawn to the one who was carefully trying to hide. A strong gust of wind blew Ellie's hood off. Isaac growled and demanded to know where everyone else who had been at the auction was. Without waiting for an answer, the man ordered his men to surround the company. Deniz tried to convince his opponents that the girl was with him. However, it was all in vain, and he received a blow to the stomach. The attack was so powerful that the guy fell to the ground. Eliza immediately ran up to him and then, raising her head, asked them to let go. But judging by the weapon in his hand, Isaac had no intention of doing so. A moment later, a man flies towards them, screaming that soon the entire group will go to hell. Wanting to help her partners, the mage activated the spirit summoner. Immediately, spirits appeared on the beast's path, leaving behind the flight of the axe. The former opponents, who were still nearby, decided to save themselves and not put their lives at risk. It was the right choice, as Isaac quickly dealt with the summoned spirits. His next target was Jared's girlfriend. Not wanting to give up so easily, Allison summoned Fireball. However, the man deftly dodged and attacked her in return. The girl was unable to foresee this and took the force of the blow upon herself. At this time, the Hunters Guild came across the fleeing people. When the boys were told that the Bloody Gate was trying to kill a beautiful girl, Jared understood everything. Without a second's delay, the young people ran to help their friend. The magician fought desperately for her life. A strong opponent shook her and demanded that Allison call out Jared, but she was not going to do it. Isaac's subordinates laughed at the fact that such a beautiful girl would give her life for a guy. However, their good mood was interrupted, and Isaac's weapon was knocked out of the line of attack. The man glanced to the side, his eyes filled with fear. The reason was simple: the frightening sight of a fist in front of the nose. Jared was stronger than his girlfriend, so his attack did not go unnoticed. While Isaac was trying to recover from the blow, the tamer picked up Ellie in his arms. Looking deeply into the guy's eyes, the girl apologized for her behavior. But the conversation between the couple was interrupted by the beast, who laughed vilely. The next moment, he gave the order to his men to capture Jared. The player looked around in fear, trying to calculate his actions. But some movement began in the enemy's rear ranks. It was Kevin and Todd who couldn't let Ellie get hurt. Having made their way to their friends, the boys asked the tamer to take care of her while they fought. The magician, holding something in her hands with the last of her strength, handed it to the guy. It turns out that Allison gave Jared the death ring. This was exactly what was needed right now. Inspired, the young man rushed to support his friends. To deal with the enemies, the player decided to use absorption. Since the Ring of Death absorbed the power of the killed enemies, there was an increase in attributes of plus 100 points. Seeing that the situation was not in their favor, the Bloody Gate decided to use a bow. But this is what Jared needed to activate the skill. Hell Dragon's Roar. Chance to summon a Hell Dragon that deals damage equal to 400% of the player's strength. In an instant, the entire battlefield was filled with the roar of the beast. The fire consumed more and more enemies with each passing second. Isaac couldn't believe how much stronger Jared had gotten in just a few days. Believing that he was being deceived again, the man went on the attack. However, he miscalculated again. Hopelessness was what could be read in the eyes of the guild leader. Isaac said that if the tamer attacks him, the people from the Bloody Gate. But Jared said he wasn't afraid of it at all. By cutting off the man's head, the tamer wished to become his good man in the next life. Approaching his comrades, who had also dealt with the enemies, the guy asked them not to kill the Bloody Flower. As soon as she got the stone in her hands, the monster immediately transformed. Calling the travelers pious warriors, the woman asked them to follow her. The partners began to have doubts, but Jared said that the monster would lead them to the source of the dream. Approaching a huge drop of water, the guide asked the sleeping soul to wake up. The liquid began to bubble and form strange shapes. And then, having become transparent, she showed the person inside herself. It was a girl who, with her eyes wide open, waved her hand and greeted the chosen one. It was one of the 10 gods of the game. The goddess descended smoothly and touched the surface of the lake with her feet. She said that she had been waiting for a warrior for a long time. Looking at Ellie, the woman said that she would give her a gift as the first player that he found for her. And then that very flower of dreams fell into the hands of the sorceress. The girl immediately threw herself into Justin's arms, screaming that Arksar was now saved. The guys standing near the couple pretended to be talking about something important. When the emotions subsided, the tamer began to prepare the potion. After some time, everything was ready. Jared began to summon his beast. When the dragon appeared, the hero said that he had prepared a potion for him. Little by little, the tamer poured the liquid onto Arksar and waited impatiently for his reaction. And then the snake was engulfed in a glow that signified complete recovery. As soon as it was all over, Ellie rushed to her pet and began to tell him how much she missed him. The goddess was watching this whole picture. And then, holding out her hand, she placed one duty on the guild. Allison received a notification about the start of a covert team mission at Mungli Villa. A card with an image of a goddess appeared before her eyes. Not understanding what was happening, the boys became alarmed. However, the girl was calm and looked at the woman with anticipation. The game revealed that 1,000 years ago, ghosts invaded the continent of Apocalypse, and Mungling Villa remained the only place protected by the formation. The 10 gods united to fight back and sealed the king of the Ghost Clan. The demon's last words were that the gods were only delaying the inevitable. After the Great War, the whereabouts of the other 9 gods were lost, and the woman herself fell asleep. What the players see now is just an illusion left by the goddess before she fell asleep, and she needed to find a warrior so that he would find her and wake her up. The game said that the comrades need to follow the clues and find the lost goddess of dreams. Jared warned his comrades that they had been transported to the quest location. The crunch of branches was heard behind. These turned out to be monsters that flew out to the Hunters Guild and hoped for the element of surprise. Jared, expecting an attack, jumped to the side and warned the others. Allison pulled out her staff and said she could stop one enemy. The tamer took on several more opponents. A charge of magic flew towards the guests. And now, the girl was already looking with pleasure at the result of her work. But suddenly, the monster under the layer of ice began to move. A sharp movement, and the enemy is free again. Kevin, not wanting his sister to get hurt, decided to fight head-on. The guy confidently delivered blow after blow. The blades fluttered in his hands like butterflies. Seeing that his opponent was open, the swordsman rushed towards him. With 2 precise attacks, Kevin was able to eliminate both monsters. At the same time, a battle was waged with other monsters. The moment came when Jared swung his sword for the last time. Lowering his weapon, the tamer announced that they were finished. Ellie approached and clarified that they would be able to leave this space only after completing the task. After which she looked with interest at the shining butterfly. Following the insect, the magician realized that they all disappeared into the water. Deciding to test his friend's words, the player activated the treasure hunter. With his special vision, he saw a chest at the bottom of the lake. Leaning towards the enemies, Jared said that they looked like ghosts in the illusion of the dream goddess. Allison wondered how they could have appeared here if this clan was suppressed. The tamer realized that the butterflies also appeared out of nowhere. He said out loud that most likely their guild was in the goddess's dream. The guy explained his theory by saying that dreams don't follow the rules of the game, which is why all this happens to them. Only the dream goddess can store and move multiple players' data at once. That's why she asked the hunters to find and wake her up. Deciding not to waste time on empty talk, Jared jumped into the water. Allison activated the water avoidance skill, which gave everyone the ability to move freely underwater. The tamer saw that the butterflies were flying towards the stone gates of the palace. He also noted that there was a passage inside. But then the girl was attracted by something on the side. She told the others that there was something at the bottom of the lake. Suddenly, tentacles shot up. They immediately rushed towards the magician and began to wrap around her limbs. Jared, who was closest to Allison, swam to save her. The tentacles squeezed the girl's body more and more tightly. But the young man quickly reached her and cut through the obstacle, holding his friend back. Suddenly, the system reported that the spell was about to end. Turning to his friends, Jared ordered them to go and open the door while he tried to hold off the monster. Kevin and Todd led the way to the castle entrance. The game signaled that there were 10 seconds left until the spell ended. The tamer was trying to buy time for his comrades all this time. Kevin screamed in fear at Todd that they needed to make one last push to open the door. And then the avoidance of water ended. At that very moment, the guys were able to open the obstacle. Having answered this, the main character, not forgetting about Ellie, began to cut a path for them to the building. He looked back doubtfully. Not wanting to lose his friend again, Jared grabbed her hand. After a few moments, they both almost crossed the barrier. but the vile monster managed to grab hold of its tamer. Immediately, the entire God Hunters Guild rushed to help their leader. Cutting off the offending limb, Kevin ordered Todd to close the door. And now one of the dangers is behind us, however. Our heroes had no idea what awaited them next. Once in a safer location, the team took a break to catch their breath. A couple of minutes later, getting to his feet, Jared suggested looking around. A closer inspection revealed that there were words of the Ghost Clan on the walls of the cave. Everything indicated that there had once been a fierce battle here. Kevin wondered if the ghost invasion had anything to do with the impending disaster. He remembered that soon something would happen in the world of the apocalypse that would leave no one alive. But then Allison caught the attention of the others. Their eyes opened to a high staircase and 2 stones on it. Jared immediately recognized the dream goddess who was chained up. He realized that her dream was not accidental and that there was a conspiracy behind it. Suddenly there was a loud clanking sound of a chain on a stone. The stranger sitting next to the goddess greeted the guests. Her eyes flashed and she asked if the beetles knew whose territory they were entering. The villainess admitted that she didn't expect them to travel such a long way. Approaching Onera, the stranger asked her with hostility to accept her fate. After grabbing the ghostly butterfly, the woman realized who had brought the players to this place. Leaning towards the goddess's ear, the villainess admitted that she was even glad of this entertainment. And then there was an explosion behind them. All this time, the fighting heroes demanded that the dark-haired one release Onera. All they got in response was unpleasant laughter. The stranger reported that no one leaves her domain alive. The woman backed up her words with her actions, confidently controlling the chains. However, her target was not the boys, but the rock hanging above. And then, with a sharp movement, she directed it at the opponents standing below. Having barely dodged the attack, Ellie and Jared decided to summon the spirits. At one point in the past, the goddess assured the girl that there was more power in her body than she thought. What these two were about to do scared the villainess a little. Meanwhile, Allison had already used her skill and directed the dead towards the target. They tried to leave the block flying from the ceiling without fear, but it was all in vain. The villainess shouted that even Onera couldn't defeat her with this trick. However, Kevin decided to join the fight, and Todd said he shouldn't be written off either. The woman threw chains towards them and promised that she would kill the guys. This weapon locked the soul of everyone it could capture. However, no one knew about this until now. With a crazy laugh, the villainess announced that the boys were now her puppets. And as confirmation of her words, young people began to feel changes in themselves. They became like wild animals. The pleased with herself crazy woman said that she likes to watch people close to each other fight. Still hoping for a miracle, Allison asked her brother what was going on. She shouted to him that she was still the same little Ellie, but her prayer was not heard. And Jared saved her from death again. He met Kevin's attack with confidence. The villainess advised the guy not to bother, saying that his friend was now just a puppet. However, Jared did not want to give up. The force of the blow sent him flying backwards, and only his sword helped him stop. Having freed himself from the obstacle, the enchanted Kevin rushed towards his sister. Our hero tried to leave the guy by reminding him that he was trying to kill his sister. Allison looked at the approaching swordsman with fear. On the other side was Todd, who aimed straight at the girl's heart. With the last of his strength, Jared warned his friend about the danger behind him, but it was already too late. However, one of the risen dead still defended his mistress. The tamer realized that Allison's summoner had improved, and now the undead could protect its master on its own. The villainess laughed and again ordered the guys to kill the couple. She demanded that the players not resist, as their end was predetermined. Jared knew that if they continued fighting, they would only lose strength, and he decided to pull out an ace up his sleeve. The appearance of the dragon could turn the situation in their favor. Having seen the beast, the woman stated that now the tamer would definitely lose. To confirm her words, she sent the chain arrow of fate towards her opponents. The villain said that she would allow the player to watch his comrades betray one by one. The chain managed to catch the dragon and it fell down. The roar of Arxar's fall filled the entire cave. Noticing her friend's worried look, Ellie said that she was fine, but their conversation was interrupted. Leaning towards the guy, the villainess said that his animals and companions would soon become servants of the King of Ghosts. But in response, she received only a sly smile. Suddenly, a dragon roared behind the woman. His roar filled the ears of everyone present, and the next moment he leaned down and grabbed her in his mouth. However, Jared's joy was short-lived, as Kevin and Todd were still chained. The tamer gave the command to Arxar to strengthen the wing, which was immediately done. Allison assumed that the spell should wear off after some time, or the villain was still alive, and then a flower began to grow from a skull that lay nearby. In a moment, the recently destroyed enemy stands before them. Jared was not prepared for their opponent to turn out to be a dream spirit. The villain said that this time she would not leave the boys a chance. The tamer thought that the woman, like other spirits, should be afraid of the light. Wanting to stall for time, Jared asked why their opponent had betrayed Onira. In response, she screamed that she never wanted to hear that name again. The woman said she believed that only she could lead their clan to prosperity. Having calculated their only chance of survival, Jared called the elf and asked what time it was. The girl replied that it was now 6:45 in the morning. Remembering how she dealt with the red flower, Ellie understood her friend's idea. The player reported that the spirit is here, because it is hiding from the sun and daylight. Taking aim, the guy threw the sword towards the villainess. The woman, noticing what the enemy had done, said that it would not harm her. However, this time she was not the target. To the sound of a loud female scream, the weapon crashed into the cave wall, and the first rays of the sun burst inside. They pierced the body of the villain and caused severe pain. Jared said that now all her dreams were ruined. Immediately, the enchanted guys began to come to their senses. The first thing Kevin said was that he had a headache. Suddenly, the spirit raised her eyes and asked those around her who they were. Everyone was surprised by such a transformation, because the woman in front of them did not look like the one who had recently attacked. Jared theorized that the spirit had previously been under the control of a clan of ghosts, but the sunlight had broken that connection. The shackles that held Onira began to slowly disappear. The next moment, the girl opened her eyes and looked at the guys. She confidently flew up to the admiring glances of the spectators. Activating magic, the goddess summoned her subordinates. As if from thin air, the spirits of dream began to appear in the hall. They bowed their heads before their awakened goddess. Taking a look at the former villainess, Onira sympathized with her for the trials she had gone through. The girl explained that when the Ghost King was sealed, his spirits bewitched her people, and she was forced to sleep. In her dream, the goddess saw many clashes, but she can no longer watch Apocalypse face disaster again. To wake up, the woman could only create an illusion that called worthy candidates to the villa. The system congratulated the God Hunters Guild on completing the mission and receiving the artifact of Onira's blessings. The winners were also entitled to a reward, which they immediately began to divide. Unexpectedly for Allison, the goddess called her to her side. When the girl approached, Dream handed her a staff. It was Onira's blessing, which increased the player's and his comrades' stats by 20%. The woman explained that Ellie's talent card was originally converted from her strength. After overhearing the conversation, Jared came to the conclusion that the talent cards carry the powers of different gods of the apocalypse. Before letting the boys go, the goddess asked them to quickly awaken the other gods who would be able to resist the catastrophe. After completing the quest, the company was transported to Mungling's villa. Everyone was surprised by the changes that took place here. However, in the apocalypse, everything could not be peaceful. Allison turned around to see a bloody Eliza. The girl, wanting to warn her comrades, asked them to run, but it was already too late. The Bloodgate Guild has come to avenge Isaac's death. Wanting to resolve things peacefully, Ellie reported that the man had attacked first. Seeing that the situation was not changing, the girl used Onira's blessing. Not believing that the little brat had gotten the artifact they had been looking for several years, the man said it was a fake. However, when the two guilds met in battle, the opponents had the opportunity to see for themselves that this was not the case. Feeling the rage rising in his chest, the enemy admitted that Allison had a real artifact. But he also realized that the lives of his subordinates could not be saved now. After some time, two soldiers ran up to the elder and said that almost all of their people had been killed and asked him to take a break. Despite their request, the man instead grabbed them by the throat. He growled that the Bloody Gate had raised two cowards, and now they would have to be the victims. After absorbing the subordinates, the enemy called for more warriors. And then, in the darkness, strangers began to appear, their eyes sparkling. Not knowing what to expect from them, our heroes huddled together and prepared for battle. The elder said that he was forced to take revenge for the murder of his people. Otherwise, he would lose his reputation. The summoned warriors said that either they or the players would die today. A wave of the hand and a bloody wound is cut across the palm. And after that, the blood ended up on the altar. Todd said it looked like a formation skill being launched by multiple people at once. Something incomprehensible lit up above the players' heads, and energy from the stones rose towards this light. Kevin and Jared decided to take a look around, asking the others to stay put. Reaching the edge of the area, the tamer assumed that this was the border of the formation. He decided to test the easiest way out, to break the barrier. The young man struck several blows, but they were all in vain. The elder's voice rang out from above the platform, saying that no one could leave the blood sacrifice formation. After these words, Jared hopelessly lowered his sword down. Returning to his friends, the protagonist reported that it would not be possible to destroy the formation by brute force. At this time, outside the formation, the elder gave the order to his subordinates to strengthen the formation. more blood immediately began to flow across the altar. And inside the formation, dead people began to crawl out. They began to slowly surround the boys. But the team was not afraid and immediately rushed into battle, easily defeating the enemies. The elder said that the number of ghosts in the formation would only increase. Jared realized that the power of the formation was that it absorbed the spirit and time of the enemy. Suddenly, a woman jumped out from behind him. The ghost grabbed the guy by the neck and pressed himself against his body. Leaning close to his ear, his rival invited him to stay with her in the formation, trying to pry the ghost's limbs away from himself. Jared said he wanted nothing to do with her. At this time, the rest of the players were engaged in an intense battle. Kevin shouted that they needed to find a way to destroy the formation. He understood that they would only be able to get out when the sign outside was destroyed, and they should try to break out, at least one person. Meanwhile, new ghosts were approaching. The guy realized that their attacks on the formation were too scattered. And if all forces are concentrated in one point, they will be able to punch a hole in the dome. Not far away, next to Mungling's villa, Arya was walking. She had expected that by arriving here she would receive a reward for the Bloodflower monster, but someone had beaten her to it. But then she was distracted from her deep thoughts by a pillar that had grown nearby. She decided to find out for herself what was happening and transported herself to the scene. Finding herself on the battlefield, the girl was surprised by the number of corpses of the Bloody Gate. And then, looking closely, the thief saw the guild elder and realized that she had seen the formation being activated. The last time the Bloodgate used it was when they attacked Ice City and killed the leader of the Beastman clan. Suddenly, cracks appeared on the dome, and Arya's gaze shifted there. Inside, she noticed an old acquaintance and decided that they could work together to destroy the rival guild. To destroy the formation, it was enough to kill one of the old men who supported it. Having decided on her actions, the girl began to act. Having chosen a target, Arya jumped towards the man. A moment later, there's a deep cut on the warrior's chest. The wound proved fatal, and before the elder's eyes, his man died. Pleased with herself, Arya thought that she had helped Jared, and now everything depended only on him. At this time, the ghosts inside the formation began to lose strength. Feeling that the stone grip was no longer on him, the boy began to act. Having intercepted the woman, he sent her away from himself. And she, having hit the ground, began to disappear. Jared saw that the formation was broken, and told his friends that it was time to fight back. But then the formation began to crack, signaling that it was about to collapse. The boys began to quickly look for ways to escape from captivity. Todd and Ellie grabbed Eliza, who was moving with difficulty, and dragged her towards the exit. Standing on the other side of the rift, Jared reached out to his friend to help her cross it, and behind them, everything gradually collapsed. Grabbing Allison's hand for support, the handler pulled her toward him. Todd, seeing how the girls were being helped, called his friends evil people who didn't think about him. Realizing that the formation had not saved him from his opponents, the elder became angry. He promised that no one would leave the dome alive today. The villain shouted that even if he died today, the others would die with him and attacked. After some time, the smoke from the impact began to clear, and the man saw that his rivals were still alive. Looking at his grandfather with anger, Jared said that they would not die just like that. Arya, who had been observing the situation all this time, decided to help and threw the flying magic thread to the tamer. Accepting the help with gratitude, he grabbed the rope. The girl, having made sure that everything was ready, jerked her weapon upward. Once outside, Jared promised the old man that today he would pay for all his misdeeds. And a battle immediately began between them, from which only one winner was to emerge. The elder felt that his body was unable to move quickly due to the large loss of blood. Thanks to this, Jared got close to the old man and pierced him with his sword. When the battle died down, the guy approached Arya and thanked her for her help. The girl said with a smile that it was nonsense and handed her comrades a health potion for Eliza. Allison took the potion and thanked her new acquaintance, saying that now the past grievances between them were forgotten. Arya admitted that she returned to Ice City because the enemies least expected to see her right under their noses. But then the girl advised the tamer to be more careful, as he had become a thorn in Troy's side. It turns out that the Murder Association is offering 1 million gold coins for Jared's head. Arya said that Troy would most likely try to seize power in Ice City. Noticing Ellie's worried look, Jared promised that he would not let Troy ruin the lives of innocent residents of the city. A few hours later, the company arrived in the city, where Eliza began to give them a tour. But one thing was unusual. All the residents were discussing their victory over the Bloody Gate, and looking askance without embarrassment. Allison whispered that she didn't understand how they knew all this. Jared admitted that he sent Todd ahead, who told them what happened. The girl admired the guy's intelligence, because thanks to it they freely entered the city and no problems arose. Looking back, the tamer thought that here everyone was judged only by strength. To strengthen his position, Jared decided to expand the guild. They were met by a woman at the Guild Management Association. She pestered the tamer and said that she could offer him all kinds of services. However, he was not the only one who heard this, not wanting a conflict to flare up here. The guy said that he didn't need anything, just to raise the guild's rating. The employee reported that in accordance with the current contribution, the guild level has been raised to 5th. With the number of possible members increasing to 30, Jared decided to look for new strong players. He took to the city stage, promising to build a better place in Ice City without threats or intimidation. A stranger from the crowd reported that their guild had protected him at Mung Ling's villa. It was these words that gave rise to applications for membership. And while everyone was fighting for the opportunity to join the guild, a man was watching them, who was unhappy with what was happening. That same day, Jared gathered all the new guild members in the tavern. The combined strength of their guild became the first in the Ice City. This is what people celebrated, and every toast was for their leader. But then the tamer's fun was interrupted by Todd, who appeared in the doorway. When the guy went out to see his friend, he learned that something strange was happening in the city. The archer tried to buy a health potion, but was refused, as everything was already sold out. The seller promised that new products would appear in a week. The main character decided that someone did not want a comfortable life in the city that he declared his own. The ill-wisher also has enough money to empty all the shops, and the guild will have to find out who is behind this. After some time, the player gathered his subordinates and reported that the stores were updating their assortment that night. The guy distributed his men among the shops, so that they would track the enemy. Suddenly, the young man heard a familiar voice from the side. He told Ellie and the guys to follow the original plan, and he would go see what was going on. Those Arya was chasing had bombs in their hands, which the rival used to make her stop running after him. The use of such a weapon came as a complete surprise to the girl. The bombers ignored the cries of city residents about the illegality of using bombs. At this time, Jared managed to pick up Arya in his arms and save her from another projectile. When the danger was eliminated, the guy asked the thief who she was chasing. The girl admitted that she noticed how the two bought everything and left nothing for her. Jared said it wasn't surprising since they got in from outside. Deciding not to let the disturbers of the peace escape, the boys jumped up from the ground and ran after them. The enemies realized that they were being caught up with, so they decided to blow up their pursuers. A clever turn of events, and the bombs are already flying towards Jared and Arya. However, a newcomer came to the guy's aid, wanting to protect his leader. He put up a shield, which bounced the enemy's projectile back at them. And this played into the hands of our heroes. The enemy was defeated by his own weapons. The dust and smoke from the attack began to clear. Everyone looked around with concern, expressing their readiness to help the victims. Jared, approaching the defeated opponents, said that they were trying to buy up all the goods in the city. Bending over the dead man, the hero took out a familiar symbol. It was a medallion that revealed the pest's affiliation with the Divine Guild. Approaching Ellie, Jared said that he was going to go to the Moon City and find out about Troy's plans. Hearing the couple's conversation, Arya ran up to them and said that she would also go with the tamer. The girl said that she had to take revenge on the villain for the mischief he had done in the Ice City. Sometime later, the boys reached the Moon Castle. At the entrance, security blocked their passage and asked them what they were doing there. Jared reported that their team had returned from a mission arranged by the leader. The guards believed the legend and let the boys through without any problems. Arya, leaning towards her friend, whispered that she had not noticed his talent for deception before. A couple of minutes later, the comrades came out into the large hall, and then a man noticed the new arrivals and called them to him. Luckily, the man only asked his friends the reason for the delay, to which they gave him a very vague answer. The commander gave the order to form up and not delay the team. Not wanting to arouse suspicion, the friends complied with the request. Looking closer, Jared realized that the other henchmen also had potions in their hands, but from other cities. The man shouted that everyone should come in one by one, leave their things and leave. Otherwise, there would be bad consequences. One after another, people in raincoats entered, but suddenly a cry for help was heard from the room. The chief said that it was just an accident and asked the others to continue. Finally, it was our hero's turn. Arya felt a wild fear and clung to Jared for safety. The boys were tense, not knowing what to expect next. But they were not prepared for what they saw. It turns out that Psycho Troy is trying to tame monsters. Suddenly, a voice was heard warning that one should not show one's fear to the monsters. Jared decided that Troy was buying up resources from the cities and converting them into food for these creatures. These monsters can attack anyone, even their owner. Confident steps were heard from the side. The comrades turned around and came face to face with the enemy. It turned out that he came here to check on the monsters. The servant informed the chief that it would take about 2 more weeks to complete. As if confirming the man's words, one of the creatures roared loudly, and then she released flames from her mouth, as if she were a dragon hybrid. And then Jared decided to take advantage of the created fuss. He was able to accomplish what he had planned, and Troy didn't notice. Everything the player did was aimed at copying the talent, Divine Monopoly, which increases all rewards by 100 times. Suddenly, the boy took out the silver dragon flute. This item was only suitable for tamers and controlled all monsters around. Our hero thought that Troy received this instrument only thanks to his talent. The villain told his servant that the knights were waiting for their tamed monsters, so the process should be accelerated. Jared, sensing his partner's anxiety, announced that it was time for them to leave. They immediately began to carry out the plan, but they were stopped. The boys froze in tension, thinking that they had been exposed. Troy looked at the boys' backs with suspicion, but everything was much simpler. The guy ordered them to remove the corpses from the ground, and then the villain headed in a direction known only to him. Uncomfortable and sad, that's what Jared felt now. He and Arya still had to drag Troy's servants out into the street, and then they hurried back to the Ice City. Feeling like he needed some time alone, Jared headed to the roof of the tavern, where Ellie found him. He confessed to his friend that Troy was raising creepy monsters. The guy suggested that after the creatures grew up, the villain would attack all the major cities. Allison asked if they could hold off his attack. Jared thought for a moment and admitted that the city's current level of defense was too low, but they did have some capabilities. There is an ore that can resist dragonfire and strengthen city buildings, but it is mined by goblins. Touching Ellie's shoulder, the player asked her for something. The request was to guard their city while the tamer went to get the ore. The player's path lay in a withering forest. The reason was that goblins tend to live away from the city. Looking down, Jared saw a huge footprint. This discovery surprised him. It was the trail of a giant, but they weren't supposed to be around here. The tamer suggested that the appearance of giants was connected with goblins, since they always fought with each other. But then the guy's attention was drawn to a scream. Not far from him, there was a giant who was trying to get someone out of the tree. It turned out that the monster had driven a small goblin into the hollow. Deciding not to leave the girl in trouble, Jared threw the giant away. The giant was unhappy that the little man had snuck up behind him and attacked. The hero said that he did not want to watch others being bullied. The offender decided to take revenge for his pain, and found a suitable weapon for this. He pulled the tree out by its roots and pointed it towards the guy. The stranger, realizing that her savior was about to be killed, closed her eyes sadly. However, Jared was able to dodge and also understand the giant's weakness, clumsiness. Unexpectedly for the enemy, his opponent disappeared from sight, to also suddenly appear behind and carry out an attack. One blow and the giant is defeated. Thanks to Troy's talent, the player's level was raised to 60 much faster. And then Jared remembered for whom he entered the battle. He carefully approached the stranger and looked at her with interest. The hero extended his hand to her and informed her that it was now safe here. The little girl, with doubt, nevertheless trusted her savior. She placed her hand in Jared's and squeezed it tightly. Suddenly, tears began to flow from her eyes, and she began to fervently thank the guy for his help. However, Jared became interested in the ore on the goblin's body and asked to sell it. The girl refused to give up the crystal, but promised to try to negotiate with her relatives about selling the reserves. The tamer promised that in that case he would take the baby to the camp. On the way, the goblin said that she went out to look for clues about the main god, because while he was with them, there was no need to be afraid of giants. Jared wondered if the disappearance of this god might be related to the invasion of ghosts. Suddenly, the girl announced that they had arrived. However, in front of them there was only an empty clearing. Smiling, the little girl raised the crystal in her hands. She began to wave it vigorously in the air. Then butterflies surrounded her, as if they were trying to convince themselves of the person in front of them. And after that, a huge rune appeared. Trusting the little goblin, the young man jumped towards her. In a moment, the clearing is empty again, as if no one had ever been there. At this time, Jared found himself in a cave where ordinary ore was clearly being mined. Suddenly, the girl's stomach began to rumble, showing that she had not eaten anything for a long time. The guy decided to help her and took a chicken leg out of his inventory. It seemed as if at that moment the little girl was the happiest in the world. And now their path became more fun. But when the mission was completed, Jared was in shock, and the food that the goblin liked so much fell into the mud. The reason was simple. The entire goblin camp was destroyed. Not believing her eyes, the girl began to cry, not understanding how this could have happened. Looking at the dead man, Jared assumed that giants had broken in. He assumed that the enemies had burst through the hole and attacked. And then the next mission was activated: rescue the goblins, which was supposed to give that very ore. The partners decided that they should find the giants and take revenge for what they had done. After some time, they came to the enemy camp. Trying not to make noise, the comrades entered inside. The giant sitting in the tent guarded the remains of the goblin people and discussed how they would get rich from the stolen ore. Not wanting to listen to this, the goblin tried to run towards her opponents and destroy them. However, Jared stopped her and asked her to leave the matter to him. The tent fabric was easily torn by the sword. The hero entered and asked if the creatures were ashamed to sell living beings. The giant roared and told his comrade that they must catch the man. When the creatures were dealt with, Jared approached the captives and announced that he had come to save them. It was at this moment that a girl's head poked into the tent. The goblins immediately rushed to her and began to ask their princess to leave. But it turned out that the battle was not over. Seeing a shadow appear outside the tent, the player covered his partner, but it was already too late, as the giant, dissatisfied with his subordinates, entered inside. It was the enemy captain who ordered his soldiers to drag out their sleeping comrades. Looking at the captives, he ordered them to behave quietly. Otherwise, hard times would await them in the future. At this time, the giants were arguing, as they could not wake up their fellow soldiers. At this time, the tamer hid, drinking an invisibility potion. He understood that there were a lot of guards outside now, and it would not be so easy to save the goblins. Having hidden the princess among her people, the boy promised to find a way to get everyone out. At that moment, the little girl took something out of her clothes. It turned out that this was a communicator that would help them maintain contact over a distance. Jared, who had been watching the giants for a couple of hours, waited for the leader to release the guards, wanting to know where their kingdom was. Having decided to act, the tamer jumped down. To attract the attention of enemies, the guy created noise, and he succeeded. The giants turned around. Jared peeked out from behind cover and said he was just passing by. But the deception failed, as the victims recognized him as the one who knocked them out. The chief noted that the player followed them the whole way and asked what he wanted. The player said with a grin that he thought the giant was strong but stupid and wouldn't be able to find him. This greatly angered the enemy, and he attacked decisively. Our hero barely managed to dodge the lightning strike. However, this only made the giant even more angry. He decided to play his trump card and activated Giant Fist, but Jared was able to avoid the consequences again. The boy asked the princess to find a way to put a tracking device on the enemy. The girl, who was watching the battle with great intensity, promised to do so. The giant was at this time glad that Jared had fallen into his trap, but this was not so. But then the chief saw a goblin trying to escape from the cages. Grabbing the girl, he asked if she really had any plans for this man. Bringing it closer to his face, the enemy declared that all goblins must disappear. Even though the princess pretended to be afraid, she was able to throw a tracking device to the giant. And the next moment, the monster threw the baby into the resulting crack. The leader noticed that a man was rushing to help the goblin, and with one gesture, he pushed him away. Jared flew back and crashed into a nearby rock. The girl mentally began to say goodbye to her family, but still hoped for salvation. She looked up and became even more frightened. The giant said that she was quite easy to kill, and then pointed his finger at the princess. The brute's strength was enough for the little girl to unclench her fingers and fly down. But not all was lost. The leader saw Jared rushing after her, but he was hoping for the lava to swallow up his opponents. Turning to the squad, the giant gave them the command to return to the kingdom. The tamer heard the enemy's last words and realized that everything was going according to plan. From below, Arxer was already rushing to save his master. As soon as the partners were on the dragon's back, the guy gave him the command to move forward. Jared noted the princess's courage, to which she said that she had to save her people. At this time, the beast approached the lava. The fire caused damage to everyone who was near it, and Arxer was no exception. The girl understood that they could die and turned to God for help. He seemed to hear the prayers and surrounded the travelers with a protective dome. The hero asked where the goblin got this thing from. She explained that the pendant was left to her people by God. After the god left them, the goblins became angry with him and destroyed the things he left behind. But she managed to save the pendant and the book. Suddenly a crack appeared on the shield. It was a lava scorpion that Jared didn't have the strength to fight, so he gave the command to speed up. Arxer immediately complied with the demand. A few moments later, they were already free. The guy asked if the tracking device worked on the giant. Smiling, the girl nodded and said that this was the most advanced device the goblins had. In the heat of battle, the little girl hid it in the enemy's hair. The device showed the direction of movement of the enemies who were returning to the kingdom of the giants. Without wasting time, the comrades headed after the enemies. They were able to see how the remaining goblins were used as slaves. Seeing how angry the little girl was, Jared asked her to give him some time. At this time, the giants reached their lord. The leader reported on the attack and his heroic victory over his opponents. The lord expressed hope that the attackers would not interfere with their plans. And then the giant was shown the stolen crystals and asked to accept them. The giant began to examine the offering with interest, and then he quickly threw it up. The The small stone turned into a ridge of crystals, and one of the rays emanating from the stones hit the giant. His body began to undergo enormous transformations, but the Lord declared that he would grant his subordinate the opportunity to dedicate his life to their race. The result pleased the man, and he declared that their race would soon rise to prominence. At this time, events also began to happen nearby. A detachment of giants was walking through the desert, and our heroes were watching them. The head said that those who are late from changing the guard will be deprived of lunch. Suddenly, Jared announced that someone was due to arrive soon. Hearing this phrase, the princess asked who they were talking about. However, next to her it was already empty. Already heading towards the enemies, the tamer shouted that she would soon understand everything. The giants recognized their enemy from the desert. The guy looked at the head and greeted him happily. The brute was surprised by such impudence and informed the hero about it. The player said that he came to thank the giant personally. He explained that if it weren't for the giant, he wouldn't have been able to find out the way here. These words angered the giant, and he immediately rushed into battle. Jared's crows flew towards the giant. They obediently protected their master. The guy put his hand forward, and the birds flew at the enemy like arrows. The chief began to come up with a defense plan, but nothing better came to his mind than to hit him with his fist. Jared reported that the soft sand would absorb some of the enemy's strength, and then there was an explosion, and the giant flew back. He landed in a crowd of his subordinates and knocked them down. The tamer said that he was ready to release the giant if he told him where the crystals and goblins were. But the enemy was not going to give up so easily and decided to call all the giants with the help of a horn. However, his plan was immediately destroyed. The arrow pierced the horn and knocked it out of the leader's hands. It turned out that Jared's guild came to his aid. Joey happily declared that he was glad to finally be in action, as he had been getting moldy with boredom. The tamer said that his friends arrived just in time. Some time ago, the guy contacted Ellie and said that he needed help, and also ordered Todd to stay in the city. The girl promised to do everything. Enraged, the giant used his giant fist. He wanted to get rid of the annoying Jared first and foremost. The young man thought that this race had a developed body and a dull brain. In contrast, the player used his sword. He attacked the enemy with lightning speed, not giving him a chance to dodge. The enemy screamed loudly in pain. Smiling, Jared announced that the fight was over. In response, the giant said not to rejoice prematurely, because Lord Anku will take revenge on them. The tamer said he would look forward to it. And then he put his hand on the enemy's head and took his memory. Suddenly something shook underground. It turned out that the guild had summoned the Minotaur as an enemy. Seeing the monster, the princess began to tremble. And not in vain, because he saw the pendant on the baby's neck and chose it as a target. Crying that he was hungry, the Minotaur rushed towards the girl. Jared jumped out to intercept him and thrust his sword forward. Allison hugged the princess and tried to calm her down. The leader of the giants gave the order to his servant to destroy the people. The monster obeyed its owner and began to prepare for an attack. He directed streams of energy towards Jared, and the guy was only able to miraculously avoid them. Looking back, the hero realized how lucky he had just been. Realizing that he couldn't cope alone, the player called his friends. They began to attack the beast together, hoping that they would be able to defeat it. Jared's sword flew quickly towards the Minotaur. However, he activated an energy shield which reflected the attack. The guy said that the monster was created with the help of a crystal, and that defeating it requires 5 minutes of preparation. The hero decided to use the Dragon God stance. The charging time is 5 minutes, during which the player cannot act. The friends understood the tasks and began the fight. The monster's high level of defense hindered them. The Minotaur was able to scatter his opponents in different directions with one movement. Rose was the first to feel that her body could not move. The others realized this after her, but it was too late. The guys were sucked into the sand, and the enemy was already heading towards Jared. There are still 3.5 minutes left until the end of the 5 minutes. When the monster approached the guy, the princess jumped out to protect him. The Minotaur analyzed and came to the conclusion that the guy sitting behind was more dangerous than the little one. The thug threw the girl away like an annoying fly. Having hit herself, the princess burst into tears from her helplessness. Her sadness was so strong that changes began to occur in her body. She wished with all her might to be stronger. When the smoke cleared, the monster's ID showed that there was danger ahead. The girl demanded that the beast not approach her protector. The enemy realized that the goblin princess was in front of him and grinned. The beauty ordered the Minotaur to accept her challenge. She activated her skills and threw it towards the giant. With one confident movement, the girl deprived the enemy of his hand. However, the princess did not know that the monster could recover. Having regained his limb, the bull rushed at her, and he turned out to be stronger. Jared needed another 30 seconds, and then the leader of the giants gave the order to devour the goblin. Feeling his superiority, the Minotaur rushed to fulfill the demand. But the time for the tamer's preparation has come to an end. With a slight movement of his hand, the player stopped the attack. With an iron voice, the boy ordered the monster not to touch the princess. Meanwhile, the bull couldn't understand why his system couldn't calculate the enemy's threat level. A punch and the Minotaur is no longer a threat. The game reported that the beast received critical damage and recovery is impossible. Enraged, the leader sent all the giants to the battlefield, and the God Hunters Guild has a temporary respite. The guys who found it in the sand were able to breathe a sigh of relief, but then the princess came to her senses and began to look around. Jared realized that the baby didn't remember anything and stroked her head soothingly. Ellie came up and said that she sent the shield to the place where the goblins were kept. The team had already decided to get out, but something caught the hero's attention. It was the elemental crystal from the Minotaur. After finding this item, the game opened a new mission. The Secret of God, the essence of which is to find the missing god. After some time, bad luck befell the friends again. The giants found them and began to fire at them. The comrades managed to notice the shells in time and began looking for a place to take cover. But then Jared was informed that someone was approaching them. Hearing this, the guy turned around in surprise, and not far from him he saw a ship sailing on the sand. These were the goblins who saved the princess and her friends. As soon as the crew boarded, the goblins immediately made sure that they were all in perfect order. One of the team members said that the shield is still fighting the giants and sent them to help Jared. However, the guy was interested in the question, where did they get such a ship? The princess jumped forward and announced that this was the goblins' latest invention. Meanwhile, the goblins noticed that the giants' artillery was aimed at their ship and was about to attack. They decided to turn on the protective barriers, and the thugs realized that the enemy ship was moving towards their palace. The leader of the giants observed the situation. He ordered his subordinates not to interfere with the goblins moving forward, but he demanded that the quicksand ahead be activated, and the first trap was unexpected for the crew on the ship. The captain barely had time to turn the steering wheel, and the ship passed right along the edge of the resulting hole. Looking overboard, the princess realized with horror that just a little more and they could fall down. Jared decided to use the Call of Crows for safe movement. According to his idea, the birds should indicate where the quicksand is located. The goblin followed the tamer's commands without question, quickly changing direction. As a result of coordinated work, no one was hurt and everyone escaped from the trap. But then Jared called for a stop. A palace with 2 guards appeared before them, and the hero announced that he would go inside alone. But when the guy was about to go, Allison stopped him. With tears in her eyes, she asked her friend to be more careful. Having calmed the girl down, the guy headed to the entrance, where he was met by guards. But then his friends approached the tamer, promising to deal with these giants themselves. Wanting to fulfill his promise as quickly as possible, Kevin activated Berserker mode. And then the skill hail of invincible blades, which the guy received with an increase in level, came into play. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Jared ran inside. Once in the palace, the hero saw what he was looking for. The magic cube glowed under the ceiling, just as it had been in the headman's memory. But then a male voice was heard behind him, greeting the guest. The stranger threw a member of his guild at Jared's feet, who remained alive only by a miracle. The trainer picked up the boy in his arms and asked him to hold on for a bit. And the enemy was already prepared for battle. The young man decided that he would make this giant kneel and beg for mercy.